Gilda. Gilda was her name. I remembered it from the one time we met. We locked eyes across the room. Her smile persistent, but her motivations unreadable. A dozen possibilities flickered through my mind. I had paused too long, and my companions noticed. "Do you know her?" Raelia asked from just over my right shoulder. I figured if there was potential danger, I should make them aware. "She is Italian," I said, a frown creasing my brow. "She works for one of the Praetorian Guards, but Castile was under the impression that her handler had been killed." My mind raced, trying to identify her possible motives with the most plausible explanation I could come up with. She might be here to disrupt the choosing for her new master. Or maybe she is looking for deserters. I looked at my companions to make sure they heard me. "We should head to one of our rooms." As we turned to head up the stairs, Gilda stood up and headed for the back door. The sound of clashing blades echoed from the practice yard where she was going. Damn it, she wasn't alone. The tension tightened in my stomach as I considered our options. I hurried with my companions up the stairs and into the nearest of the rented rooms. The air hit me first, a pungent mix of sweat and stale sex. The sheets were clearly unchanged, and I doubted anyone had bothered to clean since the last guests. The orcs might tolerate humans, but that didn't mean they had to be hospitable. "Mateo, bar the door. Blaze, take the window," I said sharply, already scanning the room for anything that looked remotely clean. I was tense, and it bled over to my companions. "What are we going to do?" Maviath's voice rumbled in the room. "Don't worry, I will deal with her. I would make it look like an accident, maybe a heart attack. She was old and fat, and it shouldn't be too hard. While I'm doing that, Raelia and Mateo will find out if Warlord Rook is in the city. Then we will see if he brought Myra or Zarana with him." "What should I do?" Maveth asked anxiously. Maveth needed something to do to ease his anxiety and keep him from doing something foolish. "Walk the outer city with Benito. Ask some of the captains at the docks about where they are going and when they lift anchor. Start looking for the best way to escape unseen, and stay out of trouble." Maveth nodded sharply. An abrupt knock at the door made everyone lapse into silence. I looked at Blaze, who indicated that the window was clear. I walked to the door and pulsed earth speak. The floor had stone tiles, but the building was mostly made of large timbers, and I got a fuzzy image of two people on the other sedion, likely a woman and the other a man. The knock came again. "Who's there?" I asked in an annoyed voice. "Open the cursed door," a familiar voice said in Telian. Blaze's head snapped to me, and Mateo's jaw slackened. Benito was the only one of us who hadn't lost his tongue, and he whispered in disbelief, "Constantine." I thought it could be a trick, so I motioned Mateo back and everyone to draw their blades. I lifted the bar and carefully opened the door, prepared with my blade and my dimensional space. Constantine stood on the other side, a satisfied look on his face. A young woman who resembled Gilda stood behind him, maybe her daughter. "Well, are you going to let me in?" he asked smugly. But his eyes were dancing in merriment at our disbelief. His eyes studied everyone in the room with their blades readied, and he nodded in approval and acknowledgement. "What are you doing here?" I asked. His clothes were still sweaty from practice, but he looked fit, and I could see the outline of an adventurer's medallion under his shirt. His happiness faded, and he growled, "I came to make sure you didn't do something stupid and get yourselves killed." His eyes had settled on Raelia, and I could see the curiosity in them, trying to figure out why an elf was traveling with us. "Well, we are all fine. Thanks for stopping by." I made to close the door. Shock appeared on his face, and he almost didn't react in time to stick his foot in the door. I let a smile crack my face, as I hadn't been serious. For some reason, with Constantine here, it felt like things would go more smoothly. I let him force open the door and step into the room. He caught my smile, but shook his head like he was disappointed with my attempt at humor. His hand rested on my shoulder, ignoring the blade in my other hand, trusting I wouldn't skewer him. He patted me and withdrew his hand as he walked past me. I suspected that was all the joyfulness from seeing me I was going to get from the man. The young woman followed him. She had a weird cinnamon smell that almost made me sneeze. Constantine ignored me and clasped wrists with Mateo, Blaze, Mavaeth, and then Benito. He then faced Raelia, studying her, which caused her to step back. A cold chill went through me. Did he recognize her? Are these boys holding you against your will? He asked, half seriously. Clearly, he was trying to get back at me for trying to shut the door on him. Unspoken words passed between them, and Raelia smirked a little. And what if I said yes? I would do everything in my power to free you, of course, he said in terrible Elvish. I was hoping Raelia would rebuke him for his brutalization of her language, but she just laughed. I am here for my Goliath friend, she motioned to Mavaith. I have not been kidnapped or abused much. She added the last little bit while her eyes roamed to me. Constantine followed her eyes to me, a bit of surprise on his face. Irritated that the game of words was turning to his favor, I countered. Her name is Raelia, and she came of her own free will. My tone turned to suspicion. How did you get here? Constantine spun on his heel, and I noticed he wore 2 swords now. He explained conversationally. I ran into some friends of yours in the Imperial Palace. They had gotten themselves imprisoned. I released them, and they said you told them to seek sanctuary in the city of Gramney. I helped free them as well, the young woman interjected from the doorway. Matteo was already focused on her. My mind worked quickly, with only one name coming to the forefront. Helena, I said, surprised. And her partner, Sylph, Constantine noted. We traveled together to Gramney. His lips curled into a genuine smile of happiness, not something I expected to see on the old man. It vanished as he realized what he was doing. Seems you've been a busy man since you left my care at pup school. Helena and Sylph say they owe you a debt for saving Celine. I've already collected on the debt Viridia owed you. My face twisted in confusion, and that just made another unnatural smile form on Constantine's face. But how did you get here ahead of us, Constantine? Blaise asked pointedly. Constantine motioned his companion inside, and Matteo rushed to get her a chair. Constantine took the seat, forcing the woman to remain standing, but she did not look upset. There were no other chairs for the despondent Matteo to offer the young woman. We caught a portal to Esenhem from Gramney. We were a little over 2 weeks behind you. We knew you were going to Agartra, as that was where you thought Mavith's sister was. I nodded. His story sounded plausible so far. Gilda got us passage on a courier ship from Arteria to the Orc city of Darkrit. From there, we traveled across the Caliphate to Agortra, Constantine said, like it was just another normal afternoon for him. Mavith tensed. Did you find Zorana in Agortra? He bellowed, louder than it needed to be. Constantine shook his head slowly, causing Mavith to deflate. Constantine's companion spoke. I infiltrated the estate and talked to a number of slaves and staff. Zorana was not there presently, but she is alive. Mavith's hope quickly renewed on his face. Warlord Rook took her to Bakar, but we have not been able to locate her in the 3 days we have been here. We were also awaiting your arrival. I assured Gilda you would eventually join us, Constantine added haughtily. Gilda continued as if Constantine hadn't interrupted her. We think the warlord has her on an estate north of here, but elites and pathfinders heavily guard it, and several clerics are also on the grounds. We returned back both times when we wandered close, and I don't care to try again. There are mastiffs that patrol the grounds who can sniff out anything. I looked at the woman. That might explain why she smelled like cinnamon. Something to avoid the scenting of the dogs. We did learn that the sprawling estate is where the elder clerics who advise the Supreme reside, Constantine said. That was just like Constantine, getting more done in less time. Now that he was here, I supposed he would take over. I hadn't liked being in charge anyway. Being responsible for the lives of others was a heavy burden. We used our adventurers' medallions to travel freely in the Caliphate under the auspices of doing jobs. I pointed to his medallion. How did you manage to accept job postings without registering? I had been under the assumption that adventurers from outside the Caliphate needed to register in one of 3 cities, Kura, Bikar, or Emerald. Constantine had clearly not visited any of these cities before arriving in Bikar. Constantine shrugged. We never took any job postings. No one ever checked if we were registered. I ground my teeth a little and was slightly shamed. Mavaith had recovered from the good news of his sister being alive. An energetic exuberance and eagerness showed on his face. Is Myra alive as well? Myra was Zarana's friend and had been captured at the same time. Gilda nodded. She is. We think she is also here, but have not seen either Goliath. We have not been able to get inside the compound with so many guards about. The warlords are meeting for some reason. They are selecting a new supreme. The last supreme is presumed dead, and word has not been spread. Raelia revealed with some bluster. I had been about to say the same thing, but she beat me to it. She smirked at me. Constantin's eyes widened, and he slowly nodded as the pieces fit together in his head. Now that does make sense. His mind churned before he spoke directly to me. I suggest we wait until a new supreme is selected, and Warlord Rook returns to his estate. It will be easier to rescue the Goliaths then. I was a little shocked Constantine was deferring to me in this decision. Mavith looked anxiously at me, and I could tell he didn't want to wait. If I didn't do it, he would probably offer his services as Menashe's first. I have a way to get in and check on Zarana and Myra. Constantine cocked his head, waiting for an explanation. I tried to make it sound like it was just another day for me. We escorted one of the candidates to the choosing. I was asked to be her first, but turned her down. I have heard of the choosing, but what is a first? Constantine asked, leaning forward in his chair. It is usually a warlord who stands by the cleric during the elders' selection trials. A chronicler thinks I would make a good first for her candidate, I explained succinctly. Really? He leaned back in his chair, disbelief on his face. Now, just what did you do to make them think that? Constantine waited for me to answer. Under his scrutinizing gaze, I hesitated, as I felt he was going to judge my response. Benito broke the tension with a grin. Eric wiped out a whole pack of werewolves, uncovered Titan relics, killed an Ankheg solo, and took down 2 mountain trolls on his own. Constantine's eyebrow rose slowly, though his eyes never left mine. Did he now? Matteo jumped in, eager to add more. Don't forget about finding a necromancer and his army of skeletons. I didn't know how 2 skeletons made an army. Raelia crossed her arms and lifted her chin slightly. He also defeated a warlord in honor combat, she said, a thread of pride in her voice. I turned to her, caught off guard by the support. The hounds trained me well, I said, deflecting the credit. The lack of surprise in Constantine's steely blue eyes made me think that Castile had shared a fair bit of information with him. I was more curious about the blank stare of the woman with Constantine. She did not appear impressed with any of my feats. How many more people are with you? I indicated the woman. Constantine followed my gaze to the woman. Just Gilda. She's a changeling. Antonia's father raised her from infancy, and she served their family for decades. Now she's my persistent headache that never quite goes away. Despite the sharpness in his words, there was a flicker of respect there, and maybe even a hint of fondness. Knowing Constantine, the latter was probably not intended. Changeling? Matteo asked, taking a step back. His overtures to the woman were quickly being retracted. He had sheathed his sword but made to draw it again. Gilda's eyes traveled over everyone in the room, judging their reactions to her nature being so casually revealed. She didn't seem upset, just curious. I was shocked that Constantine was traveling with such a creature. Changelings were inferior to doppelgangers, lacking many of the qualities of true doppelgangers. While they could change their appearance, they were limited to a mostly humanoid form. They also lacked the superhuman strength of a doppelganger. I had fought powerful doppelgangers in the Shimmering Labyrinth, and they were formidable opponents. I remained calm and waited for Constantine to explain. He shrugged and talked about her like she wasn't in the room. She has attached herself to me and is mostly harmless. Changelings are intelligent and have the same desires as people, but any emotions or facial expressions they express are just an act, as their true form lacks facial musculature. He gestured at the young woman. She studied Constantine blankly for a moment before her body changed, and Matteo tripped and fell backward to get away. The woman grew a few inches, and her hair receded into her scalp. Her face went from pale to gray, and her teeth yellowed some. Her limbs elongated somewhat before the transformation finished after a dozen heartbeats. Unlike a doppelganger, the changeling still looked mostly humanoid in its natural form. I knew they had a sexual identity. Unlike a doppelganger, they were still hunted in the Empire, which made Constantine's travel companion all the more curious. Constantine waved his hand, signaling she could revert, and she regained the young, not unattractive woman's appearance. Matteo's blade was half drawn, and I motioned for him to sheathe it. Fascinating. Raelia exclaimed. I know there are small enclaves of changelings, but I have never met one. The woman tilted her head at Raelia's words. Perhaps that was her way of showing interest. Constantine shifted the conversation and said, Tell me about the cleric who wants you to be her first. Raelia was the first to reply. She's just using him to gain the seat of the Supreme. Constantine studied Raelia for a long moment, then shifted his gaze to me. When he spoke again, his voice was calm but edged with steel. I learned long ago not to trust elves, or orcs, or humans, he said, looking back at Raelia. Trust yourself. Protect your family and your friends. Now, tell me about the cleric who wants you to stand with her. I noticed Gilda moving to a corner and Matteo circling to the other side of the room to distance himself. I nodded to Constantine, welcoming his advice. We helped a chronicler, Glasha, find some artifacts. She was aware of a cleric, Menashe, who was aspiring to become a candidate for the choosing. She thought I could help, since no warlord would stand with her without a heavy payment. Eric found the artifacts with his magic earth-talking ability. But I dug them up, Benito piped up, trying to be helpful and get some credit for his work. Constantine arched his eyebrow again, forcing me to explain. I was unsure why I didn't like Constantine knowing my secrets, and Benito had revealed another one. Maybe it was because I wanted to surprise him when he least expected it. I can use my Earth Affinity spell form to see into earth and stone, I admitted to the veteran. He slowly nodded, probably replaying everything he had seen me do since we met. I like to think he was impressed. Good. What is the danger of becoming Menashe's first? From his tone, I knew what Constantine was doing. He was trying to get me to think out all possibilities before jumping in. According to the orcs, I would face resentment from the other candidates and firsts, since I am not an orc. They might find a reason to accidentally kill me during the trials. Constantine nodded, seemingly unconcerned that my life might be in jeopardy. How long does the choosing take? No one seemed to know, but I guessed. It can't be more than a few weeks. Maevith stirred, anxious to be included. Menashe promised to free my sister and Myra if she became the Supreme. I tempered his enthusiasm, no matter how much confidence my friend had in me. When there were politics involved, nothing was certain. There is no guarantee that I could help her become the Supreme. More than likely, I would make an enemy of the cleric who does become the Supreme. Well, at least you are thinking it through, Constantine said, satisfied with my response. Still, if they are inviting you among them, you could confirm Maevith's sister is there. It could save us time and help prepare. You think I should do it? I said, slightly surprised. It would be counter to what I was taught in the hounds operating in the open among the enemy. It is your decision. Constantine relaxed into his seat. Either that or we wait till the choosing is complete and follow Warlord Rook when he leaves, if he leaves. Maevith got a little uncomfortable. My mind turned to the possibilities and I nodded. We will go in the morning. Since we arrived late, she might have missed her chance anyway. We were delayed because Menashe exploded some ogres and trolls with her lightning, Benito offered helpfully. I am sure there is a good story behind that. I haven't finished my training for the evening. Eric, why don't you show me how much you have learned since we last practiced against one another? Constantine stood, not waiting for my response, and I followed him out of the room. The others looked ready to follow, but I waved for them to stay. I nodded reassuringly to Maevith. Rest up. From his demeanor, I knew Constantine wanted to talk with me alone. We descended the stairs and walked out into the practice yard. A dozen adventurers, mostly orcs, practiced as Constantine moved to a corner. A few eyes followed us, but no one seemed overtly interested. Constantine whispered, "Be careful when you go. Store the Goliaths in your bag and leave." He was letting me know that he was aware of my spatial powers, confirming to me that Castile had informed him. It might not be that easy. I need to be close, and I will be the first one they suspect if she goes missing, I said, wrapping my blade with the tacky cloth. "Where did you get that blade?" Constantine asked, impressed. I killed Boris Angela and took it. He was trying to loot Caelora when we crossed paths again, I replied casually. Constantine looked surprised for a moment but then grunted in approval. You have been busy. Did you kill Centurion Sergius's son as well? I nodded. I killed Corvus and destroyed the secondary archives as you told me to. My casual tone mimicked Constantine's usual nonchalance at accomplishing something monumental, which made Constantine chuckle. We faced off, borrowing the wooden practice shields in the yard. We engaged 3 times as we tested each other. It looks like you lost a step or two, old man, I said, smirking. It riled him up and he pressed into me again. I parried his snap kick, which he used his shield to conceal, and I slapped the edge of my blade on his kicking knee, giving him a limp as he retreated. I almost felt guilty as Constantine's mind churned to find an advantage. I was faster, stronger, and with the Dreamscape amulet, I had an equal if not greater amount of combat experience. The stubborn man did not give in and came at me repeatedly. I noticed my companions standing on the second-floor balcony, watching us. We were drawing the attention of the other adventurers as well. After nearly half an hour, we were both soaked in sweat. Constantine sported 3 bruises for every one he gave me. I could have healed them instantly, but I felt that would be cheating. Constantine suddenly stopped the sparring. Enough practice with a shield. Let's switch to 2 weapons. It was clear he had exhausted every trick he could think of and was left wanting. While Constantine wrapped his new runic blade out of sight of the others in the yard, I asked him curiously, "Where did you get that?" It looked to be a dungeon blade, but had veins that, when they reflected the sun, looked like lightning. Constantine snorted with a note of pleasure. Took it off Centurion Sergius's corpse. It was clear he was not going to add anything. I went and got a weighted practice sword. There were too many eyes for me to pull a second blade from my dimensional space. I rarely practiced with 2 weapons and only did so in the dreamscape, so I was out of practice, which was probably why Constantine suggested it. We returned to our dance of blades, with Constantine briefly getting the advantage. I quickly got accustomed to the 2 weapon styles again. I did need to practice this style more, as it required split focus in my thinking. I enjoyed Constantine's frustration more than I should have as we practiced. Then he snuck a light touch past my guard. I parried it well enough, but it brushed my thigh lightly, and small arcs of lightning raced into me, causing my leg to spasm. Constantine was a bloody cheater, but I quickly recovered, putting my weight on my other leg and using his flurry of blows to balance myself. My entire leg was numb and barely responding to my will. "Why did you reveal your sword's ability in a public place?" I asked to distract him. If I had shown such an ace, Constantine would have laid into me. "2 of the adventurers over there already know," he said, annoyed as he stepped toward my good leg. Since my back leg wouldn't respond, I couldn't pivot to defend. I laid an air shield on the ground and 2 in his path. As soon as he felt them, he tried to reverse his momentum, but I was too quick, slapping his hamstring and deflecting his blade. "Your victory," he finally conceded, his tone heavy with resignation. He gestured toward a shaded spot beside one of the weathered water barrels. Constantine swore darkly at half of the Telian gods, his voice strained as he limped across the dusty yard. Beads of sweat dripped from his forehead, matting his graying hair. He shook his head in frustration, a look of deep disappointment etched onto his weathered face. The area sheltered us from prying eyes and ears. The spectators drifted back to their own training, their conversations fading into the background. My companion stepped back from the balcony, but Gilda lingered, her intense gaze fixed on us for a few moments before she too chose to withdraw. We settled into silence as we both drank our fill of water. "You didn't need me," he finally said. "What?" I replied, confused. "You can handle yourself, and the men respect you. Leadership is a burden, one you are much more suited for than me," he said considerately. I didn't know if I believed him, so I remained quiet while I thought about it. "Be careful, Eric. Always hide what you can do. While I am at the choosing, I need someone to keep Matteo and Benito out of trouble," I finally said. "Blaze could do it, but I would appreciate you helping him. We also need to find the best way to flee the Caliphate once we have Zorana and Naira. I cannot think of a better man for the job than you, huh?" He grunted noncommittally. "Okay, just make sure I don't have to avenge your death." I am too old to fight half the warlords of the Caliphate. We both chuckled. But I sensed he might have been serious. We talked for a while as Constantine gathered my stories of all our encounters on the way to Bikar. He made me retell the Sawagan boarding attempt in detail, and pointed out a few mistakes I had made. He was concerned about the mountain trolls from the endless dark, especially when I told him that Glasha thought they were summoned by a cleric. If one of the elders or other candidates could control a dozen trolls from the endless dark could delay a lone cleric, they were truly dangerous. We both moved gingerly, as I hadn't healed my injuries yet. We ate a large meal with the others in a private room, and the atmosphere was different with Constantine here. Gilda did dampen the mood some, but it almost felt like we were back in the company as Benito embellished story after story with Mateo contributing details. Raelia was even smiling. As the night deepened, I found myself retiring to my room, the warmth of the drinks still coursing through me. The glowstone cast dancing shadows on the walls as I settled in, my mind restless. I reached out with my earth-speak ability to keep aware of my companions. Raelia passed by my door twice, her footsteps silent on the wooden floor. Yet she never stopped to knock, leaving me wondering about her thoughts. In another room I could sense Mavith's agitation. He was pacing, the soft thudding of his footsteps echoing through the floor. Meanwhile, Gilda had quietly slipped out of her room and found a perch on the roof of the adventurer's hall, where she stood watch in the cool night air. Just before dawn, the sky began to lighten, brushed with hues of purple and gold. I left the hall and stepped through the city gates, the cobblestone road stretching out before me. The chill of the morning air energized me as I walked toward the choosing. The massive wall wrapped all the way around the city and encompassed the river that ran through it. On the other side of the river, north of the city's walls, the plains extended with no farms in sight. I felt out of place as I walked on the desolate road. My only weapon was my runic dagger, but I had worn my adventurer's armor. There was no one in sight as I crested a hill. Below me, in a long valley, numerous structures were dotted among black stone paths. Large pairs of dogs walked the sprawl's perimeter under a handler's care. I was only standing there a moment before a pair of mounted orcs thundered upon me from the right. I remained calm and waited for them. Maybe I should have ridden on Ginger, as I was forced to look up at the agitated riders as they reined in their mounts. The pair were both tattooed, and I identified them as pathfinders by their armor and weapons. Human, you need to turn around and go back to the city. You will only be warned once. The orc's tone was flat and threatening. I am here at the request of Chronicler Glasha, to serve as Cleric Menasha's first, I said confidently. The two orcsies looked at each other, confused, clearly at a loss for words. They had a brief, harsh conversation, uncertain of a course of action regarding the impudent human standing before them. The older of the two finally ordered the other, "Bring the chronicler here. She can resolve this." He turned to me. "If you are wasting the chronicler's time, your honor is forfeit, and your life ends here, human." His voice was harder now. I nodded and waited as the other rider kicked his heels, his horse thundering down into the valley. It got awkward, so I pulled out an apple and started crunching it. All horses were apparently the same. The Pathfinder's mount kept trying to dance closer in hopes of getting some. I could tell the Pathfinder was not a skilled horseman from his poor control over the spirited horse. I tossed the core in the grass and the horse eagerly took it, to the consternation of the Pathfinder. It was almost an hour before I saw Glasha's pony riding up from the valley, escorted by the Pathfinder who had gone to find her. When she arrived, she was a bit breathless, but wearing a massive grin. "You have come," she said. "Am I too late to accept your offer?" I asked, somewhat amused by the Pathfinder's disbelief that I had been speaking the truth. "Demons, no. The choosing has been suspended until Warlord Melkos and Kraj arrive to confirm Menasha's claim of besting 5 mountain trolls," she said, smiling with the knowledge that it would be confirmed. "Cleric Anatasha is about to be severely disappointed that he challenged her honor on that fact." The Pathfinder interrupted the banter. "The human is allowed to descend to the valley, chronicler?" "Yes," she hissed impatiently. "He is with me. Return to watching the grass grow." She turned her pony and walked it as I caught up with her. I gave the Pathfinders an "I told you so" look before settling in beside her. Glasha was walking her pony at a sedate pace, and I took the opportunity to ask, How are things going?" Glasha groaned comically. "I don't know if it's going better or worse than expected. Tarnasha has been in 6 shouting matches since yesterday with the elders about protocols. Your appearance will cause another round of quarrels, I'm sure." She grinned madly. I could tell she was having fun, even with the Caliphate's future hanging in the balance. "What of the competition?" I asked the red-haired orc. 5 other candidates for Supreme. The 6th and 7th have already pulled themselves out of consideration. There will be a 6th if Cleric Atasha presses his candidacy when he arrives, she said mildly. 3 are favored more heavily than Nanasha, though. It is not going to be an easy road. I wasn't concerned about their politics. Glasha knew why I had come, so I asked directly, "Is Warlord Rook here?" She looked over at me, her tone serious. He is serving as Cleric Jorakasha's first. He has 4 Goliaths with him, but I am unsure if any are the ones you seek." I nodded, happy but also cautious. "Is there any way you can get me close enough to confirm?" "Unlikely. Each paired candidate and first have their own compound in the valley. The slaves do not leave the compounds." My dissatisfied look made Glasha sigh and roll her eyes. "Fine. We can stop at Jorakasha's compound under the pretense of arbitration." We reached the bottom of the valley, and the mastiffs there were the size of Glasha's pony. The dogs had rich brown leather vests that matched their coats. One trotted close to me as I walked next to Glasha's pony. It sniffed the air tentatively and growled, massive canines showing in its snarl. His partner started barking, a deep rumbling threat. Other mastiffs nearby joined the chorus. Glasha looked irritated at the handler, who rushed forward, scolding the dogs and pulling them out of our path. "They are trained to uncover anyone who is not of our blood. You can expect more such encounters." I turned and could see a 6 pairs of slowly quieting hounds in this area of the valley. It would not be easy to sneak around unseen or unsmelled. We walked past a number of large longhouses as we made our way deeper into the valley. Each large building had smaller support buildings surrounding it. Some of the structures had open windows and doors and looked abandoned. Others had a myriad of activity as people flowed around the primary structures and smaller support buildings. Some had elite guards standing watch outside, while others looked to only have civilians. Seeing me studying the structures, Glasha explained, the compounds are assigned by the elders. Most of the year, they are empty. Warlords and clerics from across the Caliphate descend on the valley when an important gathering occurs. The higher your importance, the closer your temporary residence is to the valley's center. The large structures were spaced about 100 yards apart, divided by dense thickets for privacy. They continued far into the valley. As the number of occupied structures increased, I studied the orcs moving about their business of serving the leaders of the Caliphate. Most walked with purpose and were laden with goods. Some appeared to be running messages between the buildings, judging by the haste in their steps. We had passed a lot of buildings and were approaching the center of the valley when Glasha abruptly turned her pony down a path. I turned off the primary dark stone path to follow Glasha. 2 elite orc warriors flanked the wide entrance to a longhouse. The tattooed guards stepped to block her approach even before she reached the door. Even Glasha's title was not going to gain her quick entrance. Glasha, in a sharply irritated tone, barked, "Tell Jorakasha that Chronicler Glasha is here to discuss the choosing." A graying orc exited the building at her words, and studied Glasha before retreating inside without a word. Glasha growled quietly, so only I could hear. "I hope you appreciate me supplicating. Once you identify your Goliath, let me know and I will extract us." We didn't wait long before a tall, lean orc exited the structure. He had a feral grin on his face at seeing Glasha. I assumed this was the cleric candidate from his loose clothing and lack of musculature. "Glasha, have you discarded your poor choice of a candidate and come to support me instead?" His tone was slightly mocking, and I was a bit concerned we would not gain access. Glasha sighed. "I came to discuss an alliance for the first trial. This is Menasha's first." She waved her hand in my direction, and the orc seemed to notice me for the first time. His eyes widened and he started laughing. "Seriously, Glasha? A human? How desperate is your candidate?" "She might as well concede and retain what honor she can." Jorakasha chuckled to himself. Even though orc culture was different, I would say this orc had what I would call a punchable face. If you don't want an alliance, that is fine. I know what the first trial is, though. His mocking visage faded instantly. "That would be duplicitous and lessen Menasha's honor," he said angrily. Glasha sported her own Orcish grin now. Fine, let's discuss a partnership for the first trial only. We followed the disgruntled cleric inside, one of the guards taking the pony's reins. The room beyond was massive, with dozens of orcs, humans, and 5 Goliaths moving about. One more than Glasha had said. Furniture was scattered across the chamber, and a single cooking stove was lit in the center. As my eyes adjusted to the darker room, I sent Edith to my eyes to see better. The room was divided into areas for sleeping, eating, sitting, and combat practice. 4 elite warriors fought a monstrous, bare-chested, tattooed orc. He twirled his sword in a blinding display of skill, speed, and power. His 2-handed sword connected over and over again against his opponent's weapons, forcing them back. As I focused my gaze, it became clear that he was channeling aether through his tattoos, which had a soft, luminous glow in my aether sight. The sight of his lightning-fast movements deserved my admiration. A wave of uncertainty washed over me, making me question my ability to confront such a dangerous warrior. Yet I took solace in the fact that I had other tactics to turn a battle in my favor. I tore my eyes from the impressive display to focus on the face of the first Goliath we approached. This Goliath was clearly a female, and was helping 2 human women prepare food at a long table. Curiosity made all 3 look up at us as we approached. I only knew Zarana from the dreamscape, but this Goliath was not Zarana. Her eyes looked devoid of energy. She was broken, with no spark of will there. The 2 other women working with her were the same. I pitied them and feared what I was going to find. It was clear the cleric was guiding us toward the fighting orcs, which was fine because I would be able to get close to the other Goliaths in the chamber. 3 other Goliaths were also feminine in their curves. One was working on mending some clothes, and the other 2 were among the spectators watching the combat. Their backs turned to us as we approached. The Goliath working on the leather stitching was not Zarana either. We were being led to the fighting practice when the orc warlord paused, seeing Cleric Jorkasha approaching. The combatants retreated, and all eyes turned to us. My heart raced as the Goliaths turned, and I immediately recognized Zarana. The joy she displayed in the illusory space was not there. Here, in reality, her expression was blank, but at least her eyes were not dead like the first Goliath's as she studied me with curiosity. The large warrior wiped the sweat from his face and took us in. Cleric Jorkasha was excited to speak. Warlord Rook, Chronicler Glasha, has come to bargain. She brings Cleric Menashe's first. I knew Cleric Jorkasha was expecting a stronger reaction from the warlord, but his eyes just settled on me as he studied me. A human. The cleric emphasized to get a reaction, but none was coming. There was a cold, calculating nature to this warrior that I returned. We were 2 alphas staring each other down. What bargain does she bring to us? He asked, finally focusing on Glasha. It was clear who was in charge of this partnership and making the decisions. Glasha spoke to Warlord Rook, ignoring the cleric, sensing it too. I know what the first trial is. It heavily favors Cleric Fiasha. It heavily favors Clarasha. The warlord waved his hand dismissively. Not unexpected. We will not be one of the 2 eliminated in the first trial. We do not require your assistance, and I do not want to owe you any favors, Chronicler. Menashe has not even been recognized as a candidate yet. With a little anger tainting her voice, Glasha replied, She will be by tomorrow, and Cleric Anatasha will be forced to withdraw after challenging Menashe's word. The warlord bellowed a deep, wicked laugh that made some of the slaves cringe. You hope for too much, Chronicler. Cleric Anatasha will lay the blame on someone else for supplying terrible information. You can leave. He turned his muscled, tattooed back on us to return to his practice. I looked one last time at the side of Zarana's face. She was much older and thinner than her manifestation, but it was definitely her. I wanted to reveal myself and reassure her, but that would be beyond foolish. Maveth would be exhilarated when I told him she was alive. Cleric Jorkasha was a bit flummoxed as he walked with us to the exit. He wasn't deterred and almost pleaded. What is the trial? I can promise we will not hinder Menashe in the first trial. Glasha seemed to consider as we walked the length of the chamber. A little distastefully, she finally spoke. The first trial is to return with a pixie. It must be presented alive. The last 2 to return will be eliminated. The cleric growled. What a foolish trial. But you are correct. It does favor Fioasha heavily. He stopped his escorting and eagerly returned to the combat that had ensued again behind us. He was going to use the information whether Rook liked it or not. A pixie? The annoying woodland fairies? Are they common around here? I asked. There are untouched groves a dozen miles northeast of the city. They are rare but can be found there, Glasha replied. Tarnasha learned of the trial from one of the elders. Menashe is going to have difficulty with it, so my hope is that you can aid her now that you are here. Your abilities were unknown to the elders when they were selecting the trials. Glasha formed a mischievous grin. Pixies were tricksters and not overtly dangerous unless they or their home were threatened. They would not be happy with having one or more of their number abducted. I should be able to help. I will come back tomorrow morning, and we can formulate a strategy. Glasha stopped walking and turned to me. Didn't I tell you? Unless it is part of a trial, no one who enters the valley can leave until a supreme is selected, Glasha said innocently. I stopped walking. No, you definitely failed to mention that, I said, annoyed. I was seething internally, walking next to Glasha as she led her pony. Orc attendants rushed along the path with packs of goods, looking at me curiously. Did you find the Goliath you were looking for? She asked calmly. I bit down an angry retort and answered evenly. She was among them, yes. Glasha nodded slowly and said more somberly, while most warlords treat their slaves with veneration, Warlord Rook is known for his proclivities with his slave. My knuckles cracked as I made a fist. What type of proclivities? I was glad Mavaeth was not in my place. I assumed he would not have been able to restrain himself. Sensing my anger, Glasha tempered her response. He seeks to assert his dominance over them in a number of ways. She paused as she considered her next words carefully, trying not to make me angry. But I had heard enough, not for much longer. Can my companions join us? I asked tersely. I had given it thought. The answer would be no. I tensed before Glasha continued. But warlords are allowed their attendant slaves. With you being a first, you should qualify as well. Tarnasha can announce you as Menashe's first, and then we can summon your companions. I hesitated. Would bringing Mavaeth here complicate things? It was his sister, and he should be here. They wouldn't be able to leave either, Glasha said, seeing my contemplation. I will write them a note and explain it to them then, I said, coming to a decision. I can have it delivered when it is ready, Glasha said. She motioned me down a narrow, winding path that led to a modest longhouse, its weathered wooden structure standing alone, devoid of any surrounding outbuildings. Unlike the bustling estates I'd witnessed before, there were no slaves or orcs scurrying about outside. Is there a way to free Zarana without helping Menashe? I asked as we approached the longhouse. Glasha stopped. I was not sure if she would tell me the truth or not. If you had honor, you could challenge Rook. I rolled my eyes. How do I get honor? I asked. Glasha chewed her lip, her tusks showing. She snorted and thought about how to explain it. She had tried many times during the journey, but in the end, it seemed that honor was reserved for warlords, clerics, and elites in orc culture. Honor is earned and bestowed by others with honor. It is extremely difficult for an outsider to accumulate honor. In the short time we have, I do not see that as a feasible path, Glasha said as she opened the squeaky door of the longhouse. My only recourse is to help Menashe become the supreme, I said discontentedly. I was having thoughts of Warlord Rook experiencing an unfortunate brain aneurysm. It was smoky inside from the wet wood burning in the center of the longhouse. Menashe and Tarnasha were trying to cook dinner in the haze. I suspected they had been given only wet wood on purpose, because I did not see a single attendant anywhere in the cavernous building. Tarnasha stood, a bright, tusky smile on the old orc's face. Eric, you have come to join us. We don't have much to offer, but please sit. There were no chairs, just dirty blankets spread around the fire. I folded my legs under me and sat. Menashe was studying me, some disbelief on her face that I had come. Well, I am here. Catch me up, I said, motioning to everyone. Glasha tied her pony to a rail inside with the other 2 horses before coming to sit with us. Tarnasha spoke for the group. The 5 elders are waiting for Cleric Atasha. If he confirms Menashe's slaying of the trolls, she will be allowed to be the 6th candidate. Atasha may be the 7th, but he may have lost Warlord Kraj's support. Of the other 5 candidates for the Supreme, The favored is Fiawasha, and he has the support of 3 of the 5 elders, Glasha explained. He is a powerful cleric with strong affinities in nature and earth. That is why the elders chose capturing a pixie to be the first trial. It made sense that the competition was rigged. And his first? I asked. Warlord Etus. He is the admiral of the Northern Fleet and well-liked among the populace, Glasha stated, while turning over the wood. You have already met cleric Jurakasha and his first Rook. Jurakasha's strongest affinity is protection. I think Rook hopes to be able to control Jurakasha from the shadows. His spine bends with the wind. I nodded. I had not gotten a favorable impression of either of them, and Rook was destined to die if what Glasha had insinuated was true. Tarnasha stirred his pot on the coals. Whatever type of soup he was making, it was sparse. Maybe they planned to starve Menashe into failing. I pulled out candied nuts and handed the bags around. I had purchased them in Tella long ago, but they were still warm from the vendor I had purchased them from. My orc sponsors greedily consumed the salty sweet treat. Cleric Anatasha challenged Menashe's claim of slaying the mountain trolls. It is likely he will be forced to withdraw his candidacy. But he does have one supporter among the elders. The other 2 candidates are Cleric Nalgrasha and Cleric Sarkasha. Both are unknown factors, and neither has support among the elders, Tanasha supplied. Glasha had finished her nuts and took a bowl of soup before saying, Nalgrasha is a powerful weather mage, and Sarkasha is a skilled illusionist. The only concern I have about them is that they appear to be conspiring together. And their firsts? I asked, crumpling up my empty bag and tossing it on the fire. Newly raised Warlord Batal stands with Nalgrasha, and Warlord Tile stands with Sarkasha. Neither has earned much honor among the warlords, Tarnasha supplied helpfully. Will I even be recognized if I stand as Menashe's first? I asked. This seemed to be a point of contention between Tarnasha and Glasha. The 3 orcs looked at each other, with Menashe looking the most uncertain. We will find out tomorrow evening, Glasha finally said. Warlord Melkos has purged the trolls and ogres. I expect Cleric Atasha and Warlord Kraj are racing here as we speak. Glasha stood and nodded respectfully to me. I will get your message to the Adventurers' Hall. I nodded, pulled out some paper and a quill, and began to write. I tried to keep my words as obscure as possible, so the message would not give anything away if it was intercepted. I told Maveth his sister was safe and alive. He could come only if he could restrain himself and stay unarmed. Slaves were not allowed to carry weapons. I told Constantine to take command of the others and start looking for passage on a ship for all of us, including 2 future friends. I rewrote the letter twice before folding it and giving it to Glasha. She left immediately to find a runner. Seeing I was finished, the old man whispered to me, asking wistfully, Do you have any more food? I chuckled and produced some elven bread and appleberry dungeon jam. I looked at Menashe, who looked apprehensive and hadn't spoken much since I had arrived. I offered her a steaming meat bun. What is this remarkable spread? Tarnasha gasped, tasting it. Appleberry dungeon jam, I replied, amused by the noises he made while eating it. He must be feeling the ether bleed effect of the dungeon food, and it was also an excellent jam. The meat bun I gave Nasha had dungeon bear meat and potatoes in it, but she didn't seem to realize the benefits as she ate mechanically. Tarnasha praised me. Your talents are wasted on the battlefield, Eric. I handed him one of the hot meat buns in appreciation of his praise, even though Mavaith had made the jam. I stood and started to make a place to sleep on the worn wooden floor. My earth pulse told me a massive rat nest resided under our shelter, at least 30 that I could count. I assumed it was going to be a fun night. As we all settled in, Tarnasha used his magic, weaving a complex spell form that caused all the rats and nearby creatures I could detect with my earth pulse to flee. He let out a soft chuckle, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the rats had not been there naturally. When Glasha finally returned, it was late, and unhappiness was etched clearly on her face. My heart sank at the sight, and my mind raced with concern had she been unable to contact my companions. Your message was sent to the guild hall, she assured me, her voice steady yet tinged with exhaustion. I'm confident your companions will receive it shortly. What is the problem now? Menashe asked, sitting up. She had been trying to sleep, but it was clear her adrenaline wasn't letting her. Nothing, Glasha said a little too tersely. Eventually, she conceded. It is him, she pointed at me. She pointed at me. Apparently, the elders just passed a rule that only warlords can serve as firsts for this choosing. That is itself against the rules, as any change requires 1 year to take effect, she growled, then calmed. I have been arguing with Elder Dakasha and Katasha for the last 3 hours. I handed her a meat pie and a skin of elven ambrosia. Hopefully, the elven whiskey would help her calm down and sleep. This was mildly good news for me, as it meant I wouldn't have to serve as Menashe's first. Glasha spent an hour venting her rage aloud until the ambrosia finally knocked her out. I remained awake most of the night, lying there prone and sending out earth pulses. A few patrols with mastiffs walked by our longhouse, but there was no excitement to be had. As dawn approached, I took the opportunity to get my few hours of rest. Glasha stormed off when she woke, and Tarnasha followed her to play politics. That left me and the young cleric. Where were you born? I asked to break the silence of mid-morning. Why do you care? She asked calmly, giving me her attention. She looked to have fully recovered from her lightning display in the long ride. Curiosity. You look a little different than most of the orcs I have seen. I was trying to gently start a conversation to see if the powerful cleric was an otherworlder like me. A small settlement that you have never heard of, she said, getting comfortable on the blanket. She seemed open to talking. Were your parents powerful clerics as well? I asked while stirring the coals. No, she said slowly. Studying me, neither of my parents could use ether. Isn't that unusual, with you being so powerful? I probed. I was adopted when I was a babe. I was found in a field of cabbage, she admitted. My mind was racing. Were infants also pulled into this world? I genuinely believed Menashe was an otherworlder because of her rare convergence affinity. I kept the conversation going, asking about her childhood and how she had discovered her magic. She probably thought I was just trying to get to know her and was very open. In reality, I was searching for clues. I gave her lunch from my dimensional space, and before I knew it, I was also answering her questions, albeit with more obscurity. Menashe was very interested in my own magic, but I didn't reveal anything that she hadn't already seen. It was late afternoon when a thundering procession could be heard outside. We both went to see the source of the commotion, and dozens of riders were headed to the center of the valley. I have to go and meet with the elders, Menashe said. I made to join her, but she shook her head. No, you need to remain here until you are recognized as my first. Nasha grabbed her small pack and raced down the path to join the others. Left to my own devices, I took care of the 3 horses, cleaning the floor and walking them around the building for a little exercise before watering them and staking them to graze. Even though I was fairly confident, I was not being spied on with the help of the obfuscation sphere and my earth speak. I only took Magebane from my space to practice. It was well past sunset when my trio of orcs returned. They were not alone. A smiling but anxious Maevath was leading his large black horse and Ginger. His smile creased his face, but he kept turning and searching as if his sister was about to jump out and surprise him. He looked odd to me without his unstrung bow on his back or the heavy hammer swinging from his hip. We shook wrists, but Maevath pulled me in for a hug that squeezed the air from my lungs. Don't kill me, or this will be harder than it needs to be. Maevath released me, beaming. I thought you were tougher than that. Let's not test the limits of my body. You came, so I am assuming you understand. Maevath nodded, but I hoped he would not forget when he saw Zarana. I looked at the orcs. From the smiles on their faces, I assumed it had gone well. I didn't even have to ask before Menashe barked happily. You are to be my first. This was no time for jokes or innuendos, so I just nodded. How did it happen? I asked while handing out food. It was a master display of guile and deceit, Tarnasha said happily. Not so, Glasha joked. They were just ignorant of our human friend's prowess. She saluted me with her water skin. Warlord Kraga spoke to Menashe's killing of the trolls. He then offered his support to serve as her first. What? I am confused. I thought he was supporting Natasha, and if he offered, why am I still Nasha's first? I felt I wasn't going to like the answer. Natasha withdrew his candidacy. I think it was because Kraj didn't want to risk his honor supporting him, Menashe said excitedly. Eric is a much better option, Maevath said in support. I frowned, Cleric Anatasha also withdrew after his challenge to Menasha's honor was proven to be without merit, Tarnasha added jovially. 2 candidates have already fallen from consideration. You still haven't answered my question, I said, my voice tinged with irritation. I leaned forward, my voice tense. Why isn't Warlord Crouch standing as Nash's first? My eyes narrowed. I was eager for clarification as the weight of the title hung on me, unwanted. Glasha's excitement dimmed as she explained. When Warlord Crouch offered to stand with Nasha, the elders panicked. He is a highly respected warrior, and his support would have lent her candidacy far too much legitimacy. They pivoted, fast. Suddenly, the human being as her first was no longer controversial, and they formalized the decision on the spot. She gave me a wicked smile. Little do they know just how dangerous this human really is. Mevith laughed with them. I was glad to see my friend could at least see the humor in this. Great, I offered with sarcasm. The first trial begins at first light tomorrow. You two must be seen by the elders leaving the grounds so they know you did not depart earlier. With 5 candidates, only the first 3 to return with a live pixie will be allowed to continue, Glasha said excitedly. Can Nevaeth come with us? I asked, drawing the Goliath's attention. The 2 orcs looked at Tarnasha, who was the expert, having once been a member of the elders. It would be frowned upon but permitted as long as he does not assist. I wish to remain here, Nevaeth said resolutely. Can you 2 keep him out of trouble? I asked Glasha and Tarnasha seriously. They both looked over at the towering Goliath who tried to look as innocent as possible. I knew he was going to try to see his sister. I was having doubts about the wisdom of bringing him here. Glasha slowly smiled. I can come up with a few things to keep him busy. He can carry my things while we spend the day gathering support for Menasha among the warlords and clerics. One thing was for sure. I hated orc politics. I joined the orcs as they discussed the first trial. There is only one forest a half-day's ride from here that is known to have a sizable population of pixies, Glasha announced, her eyes glinting with anticipation. All the candidates will be racing there at dawn, but they must pass the elders' longhouse. Mavith had finished with the horses and was making himself a place to sleep. I was frustrated, as I could have been replaced by a competent warlord, and they had chosen me. They didn't notice my displeasure, and Glasha continued. Pixies are tricksters and difficult to catch, especially alive. They can use their magic to transform their bodies into small animals. Some of the more powerful ones can push thoughts into your mind. I looked at Mavith and reminded myself of why we were here. My feelings were secondary. They can also make themselves invisible and disrupt magic, I added, knowing they could unweave spell forms like Castile. True, but some can only blend into their surroundings and do not have true invisibility, Tarnasha said, contributing his knowledge. Most of their magic comes from innate spells inscribed on their core, but some pixies can weave spell forms. I was apprehensive about going after the fey creatures, not knowing what I was getting into. They have true mages? Do they have offensive magic? I asked with some disbelief. Tarnasha smiled at my bewilderment. I have never heard of pixies throwing lightning or exploding their enemies with fireballs, but their magic can scramble your mind, make things appear that are not really there, and cause mesmerizing dancing lights to hover in the air for hours. Even though pixies are known for being carefree and mischievous creatures, they are intelligent beings. I know of one instance where they compelled a group of pathfinders to dance until they died from exhaustion. Never underestimate your foe. That was a sobering statement, but I smirked to myself, thinking that after the pixies saw me dance they would probably be so offended that they would let me go. In my training I was told that if you had no thoughts of harming them, they would leave you alone, Menasha said, apparently the only one in our group who was not well educated in pixie lore. Tarnasha was eager to share his knowledge. They are not malicious beings. Quite the opposite, as they have been known to help as much as tease with their magic. They can ascertain your intentions, and if you do not intend to harm them, they might play a few tricks on you, but generally will leave you be. Since you intend to abduct one of their number, I doubt they will be very welcoming. Well, good thing I am not the one trying to capture one, I said in mock seriousness, glancing at Menasha. She could be burdened with a pixie's ire. Ginger was antsy, because I had not given her much attention since Merveith had brought her. I went to deliver her an apple. as it was going to be a hard ride tomorrow. We continued talking about pixies for the next 2 hours before Menashe tried to get a few hours of sleep. I was too worked up to sleep at all. Tarnasha expected the other candidates and their warlords to do what they could to hinder us. Menashe was the most powerful mage among the candidates, and therefore the largest threat to the favored candidate, Theoasha. As the orcs tried to get some rest, I pulled a small pack from my dimensional space and packed it with food and gear, unconcerned about those in the room seeing my efforts. Magaben was also on my hip now, the hilt still carefully wrapped to conceal its runic nature. If I had to draw it, there would be no way to hide it as a powerful artifact. But being among powerful mages, it was the best weapon to have at the ready. Maveth sat with me in silence. No words were needed tonight. Our objective was close, and we just needed to be patient until we could act. He took out a leather pouch to stitch. "Do you think she will recognize me?" Maveth said unexpectedly. "You are kind of hard to forget," I replied jokingly. Maveth sighed. "When I fled, I wasn't much bigger than you are now. I cannot imagine you ever being that small, Maveth." I chuckled, and he laughed a little as well before falling into silence again. An unhappy neigh echoed from the horses, and I went to check on them. I could imagine the other candidates' allies causing problems by messing with our mounts. According to Glasha, such an act wouldn't tarnish the honor of the candidate. Ginger was dancing on a train of ants crawling around her. I think it was a devious plan to exhaust our mounts by keeping them awake all night. I had some alchemist's salve that could double as an insect repellent, so I rubbed all the horses' legs with it and sprinkled the remainder on the ground. Ginger's head pushed me hard from behind, but I think it was in gratitude. I rubbed the horses down again, finding a few ants I had missed. I checked with an earth-speak pulse, and found that at least the rats had not returned. After giving an apple to each horse, I started to pack our saddlebags for tomorrow. I found a note from Constantine in my saddlebags. It read, "Don't get yourself killed." I could imagine him saying it as an order and not a suggestion. I could tell the sun was coming soon, and the orcs were stirring and getting ready. It wasn't long before I led Ginger alongside Menashe, who was leading her large grey. Tarnasha and Glasha flanked us as we moved toward one of the larger structures in the valley. Maveth walked behind us, his head on a swivel. There were a number of Goliaths out gathering large buckets of water from wells. It was a stone building, the only two-story one I had seen. "It looks like we are the first ones here," Menashe said excitedly. Glasha was stomping mad as she stared down the old cleric ahead of us. "No, the others have already left." I looked up and guessed it was nearly an hour before sunrise, based on the blue moon's position and the gray sky. A line of old, weathered orcs stood outside the stone building, their skin patchworks of grays and greens, each face etched with the lines of time. They appeared to be patiently waiting for us, their eyes glinting with a mix of curiosity and smugness. In front of them, a wrinkled old woman stood with a light smile. Her smile wasn't a greeting. Instead, it seemed to reflect a profound sense of self-satisfaction. "When did the other candidates leave?" Glasha growled at the elder. The elder eyed me disdainfully, and I knew my presence here was not wanted. They would have been better off taking the warlord's offer. She then looked at Glasha. "I said you could leave at the start of the new day," the elder said, grinning. "That was not how you phrased it," Tarnasha hissed. "You said," Glasha cut him off angrily and barked at Menashe. "It doesn't matter. Go! You are behind the others by hours." Glasha motioned at us to hurry. I sensed a confrontation coming between the clerics, and I was happy not to be there for it. I swung up into Ginger's saddle, gave Maveth a nod, and kicked Ginger to follow Menashe. We passed a few watchposts before we reached a road. The rising sun made it easier to increase our pace. Ginger was happy for the run, but I soon had to rein in Nash's anxiousness. We couldn't run all the way there. Still, we made excellent time, covering about 15 miles before majestic trees rose in the distance, easily over 300 feet in height. The grassy plains appeared to stop just at the forest edge, like a line had been drawn there. It was going to be dark in those woods under such a dense canopy of leaves. The most serious threats we had discussed last night were treants, pixies, and of course my favorite, spiders. It didn't mean that those were the only threats, just the ones that we would most likely encounter as we searched for our prey. As we approached the tree line, 2 horses bolted from the trunks far to our left. Menashe hissed as she recognized the riders. Cleric Phaeocia has already succeeded. Now the pixies will also be alerted to our intentions. From a distance it did look like a warrior and a cleric were on the horses, a covered crate bouncing behind one of them. They looked our way but didn't stop as they raced back to be the first to complete the first trial. "We should walk," I said, dismounting as we entered the forest. My feet needed to be in contact with the ground for my earth pulse to be effective, which Menasha knew. The horses needed the rest anyway, their sweat steaming from their bodies. I walked in first boldly as my earth speak highlighted dangers at a distance. We passed a few bedded-down deer, a deep tunnel network of normal-sized forest weasels, and then a nest of giant wasps who took exception to our proximity. Menasha created a lightning shield that cooked the fist-sized wasps before they could sting us or the horses. She killed dozens before we distanced ourselves from the nest and moved deeper into the darkening woods. "I wonder if we will find a house made out of candy," I whispered as we walked. "Why would a house be made out of candy?" Menasha asked, confused. "So the witch can attract children and then cook them, of course," I replied matter-of-factly. "We would never allow a hag to remain alive in the caliphate to eat children," Menasha said seriously. I just sighed and kept pulsing my earth speak. We stumbled upon some saddlebags and the Menasha searched through them as I remained on watch. "It belongs to one of the warlords," Menasha said after a moment. "He didn't drop it. The straps were cut." I looked up into the trees and past the massive trunks. "Pixies?" I asked, looking for any sign. "Most likely," she confirmed, holding the cut leather for me to inspect. It was not one clean cut. Instead, the broken end showed lots of smaller cuts. The pixies are probably taking out their anger on the other candidates. I noticed a squirrel racing along the ground. It was circling our position. This might be a lot easier than I thought. The pixies were coming to us. The squirrel was acting curious and unnatural. When I pulsed earth speak, the squirrel froze. It locked eyes with me and I cursed. "Dragon shit." Menasha looked at me and I explained. The pixies were able to sense my earth speak pulse. They were highly magical creatures, and I now had doubts that I could store one in my dimensional space if needed. I took one step toward the squirrel, and it didn't move. However, when I got about 30 feet away, it bolted up the far side of a tree. It paused 50 feet in the air and spied on us from its perch. "Is that a pixie?" Menasha asked, studying the squirrel doubtfully. "I don't know, but it is definitely not a squirrel." A thought brushed my mind, telling me it was most definitely a squirrel. There was nothing to see here, and I should be on my way. The thought was unnatural, and I easily pushed it aside. "Yes, it is definitely a pixie." The squirrel chittered at us angrily, as if it was my fault for not succumbing to its mental suggestion. It was good to know I could resist the pixie's mind games. "Watch the squirrel," I requested as I scanned the woods around us for more. I sent out 3 more earth pulses, but it didn't pick up anything unusual. It looked like we only had to contend with one pixie. A boom echoed among the trees, and Menasha and the squirrel looked in that direction. I studied the squirrel, not getting distracted. It soon raced off toward the explosion, jumping through the branches. I guessed one of the other clerics was getting impatient. "Do we follow?" I asked Menasha. I already knew she would say yes, as only 2 more candidates could pass this trial after Phaeocia. That explosion was likely from Cleric Sarkasha. He has powerful spells that can deafen and stun opponents. As if to highlight her guess, more thunderous booms echoed in the woods. The canopy suddenly became alive with the sound of raindrops. It hadn't looked ready to rain when we entered the forest. "Nalgrasha," Menasha hissed. I nodded in agreement, as he was a weather cleric, and was supposed to be working with Sarkasha. It was clear they were battling something in the woods. We moved cautiously forward, leading the horses. Thick drops of water splattered on and around us. The water was less of an issue than the noise it was creating, which fuzzed the feedback of my earth pulses. We paused, when we could see lights dancing, flitting in the dark woods through the thick trunks. I remarked on the scene playing out. "If the clerics keep this up, they will wake the treants." I didn't know if that was true, but the clerics were definitely stirring the shit with the noise, weather, and lights. Treants were dangerous foes as they could animate other trees, creating a woodland army in moments. I grabbed Menasha's arm to stop her. I leaned into her and indicated to her with a nod. That tree hollow to our right, we were still a distance away from the action, but I caught a brief glow from the tree's hollow. It was 20 feet off the ground, but I thought it might contain a pixie in hiding. Menashe nodded, and we moved to the tree. I leaned against it, pretending to discern what was happening in the distance. My earth pulse worked poorly through the wood, and all I could sort out was that a dozen different small figures huddled inside, no more than 6 inches in height. Pixies were generally about a foot, so perhaps this was their young hiding. Juvenile pixies, I told her in Telhian, and she was immediately excited. The hollow was small, just large enough to reach into. But I had second thoughts, as taking one of their children might stir their anger even more. I thought Menashe would ask me to climb and inspect the hollow, but she handed me her reins and started climbing the wet bark. She had a crude butterfly net tucked into her belt. There were plenty of handholds in the rugged bark, and she reached the hollow quickly while I watched from below. As she peeked inside, the hollow lit up with a blinding light, and small, winged creatures dashed out in the rain. Menashe swung wildly with her net, but unable to see, she missed the pixies as they flew away. With my either sight, they looked like streaks of light as they dispersed. The tiny humanoids with shimmering wings sought new cover in the tree canopy. 2 smaller pixies tumbled from rain strikes on their gossamer wings and dashed toward the ground, to hide in a rocky crevice 100 feet away. I kept my eye on the opening in the earth as a blind and cursing Nasha descended. The orc cleric's face was burned, and her eyes looked damaged and unfocused. Apparently, a dozen pixies could create a damaging flash. My spell form had protected me well enough, and I had been a distance away. Menashe fumbled for a health potion. Why did the elders want these foul creatures alive? I shrugged, knowing pixie parts could be used in higher-tier potions. Maybe because their wings can be used in potions of flying, and their blood can be used in ether restorative brews. My focus was on the crevice as we approached the split rock they were hiding in. I was hesitant to pulse my earth speak for fear they would feel it and flee. As Menashe's vision cleared, I held out my hand for the net. I dropped Ginger's reins and walked to the split rock. Standing close, I pulsed earth speak and sensed the 2 tiny creatures hiding deep inside. Maybe these younger ones couldn't feel my earth pulse, as they remained still. Or maybe they were petrified, as the forest still boomed with combat. These were definitely 2 of the smaller specimens that had been hiding in the hollow. I felt bad for what I was about to do. I couldn't move one of the pixies to my dimensional space because they were entwined, hugging each other. Their either resistance would be multiplicative. I pulled a large cask of whiskey from my dimensional space and cracked it open. I then poured the alcohol into the crevice. If the pixies didn't come out, they would drown. I wasn't disappointed. The 2 pixies crawled out rather than drown in alcohol. They looked like miniature elves, one with pale skin, and the other with soft blue-hued skin. The net flashed in my hand, and both pixies were captured. They were sputtering from having inhaled the booze. I grabbed the first one entangled in the net, carefully folding its wings back as I wrapped it. It bit viciously into my spider silk glove, but its tiny teeth couldn't penetrate the material. I repeated the procedure with the second. Both pixies were cocooned in clean bandage wraps, their mouths covered. Both had a feminine appearance. Maybe the pixies were all feminine. Menashe was staring at the 2 tiny, captured prisoners, intrigued. Their eyes were red and slightly swollen, probably from the alcohol. I felt cruel as I handed the 2 swaddled bundles to the war cleric. Sadly, I said, we should go before they realize we captured 2 of their children. We were fortunate that whatever that is has continued. I pointed at the light and sound show in the distance. Menashe seemed shocked that the task was already done, and she nodded dumbly. We had only been in the woodland for a little more than an hour. She carefully packed the 2 pixies in a small cage she had come with, but left them bound. We both mounted, oriented ourselves, and started to ride. It wasn't long before I noticed fluttering in the trees around us. It was clear the other young pixies had seen what we had done, and would not let their siblings go without a challenge. Ginger moved rhythmically beneath me as I scanned for obstacles. She sensed the urgency of my need to escape the woods. If it was only the young pixies following us, perhaps they couldn't hinder our travel. I assumed their magic would be weaker and less refined than the adults, Sparkling lights accompanied by buzzing sounds started to appear to our left and right as we raced to leave the woods. The pixies were getting closer, trying to distract and possibly slow us. Menashe didn't seem worried about their efforts. "There is nothing they can do to stop us." "Don't jinx us like that," I retorted. "What is a jinx?" she asked. I had used the word from Earth without realizing it, as if in response, an echoing, ear-splitting thunder spread across the woodlands. "That is a jinx," I said, annoyed. The pixies were not trying to stop us but call for help. The noise was directly in our path, and I assumed it was a Trent being awoken by the pixies. I turned Ginger to the right, and Menashe turned her mount, and the forest started to come alive to our right. At least we had left the region where it had been raining. But we needed to make sure we didn't get turned around in the forest and go deeper by mistake. If I had been in this situation before coming to Dizia, I might have panicked. Now, I was clear-headed and focused on surviving. My heart was racing, and I was weighing options as they presented themselves. Menashe was not as calm, and I guessed it was because she was usually surrounded by elite orcs when she went into battle. Here we were very much exposed. "Left, turn left when we are clear of the awakening trees." That was an understatement of the situation, as the entire forest seemed to be animated, though moving ponderously slow. "Maybe it's an illusion of pixies," Menashe yelled over the horse's hooves pounding the ground as we wove between the trunks. I wished it was, but the scope and the fact that I didn't feel any pressure on my mind made me think we were facing the real thing. The Trent must have been powerful to awaken so many unless there was more than one. "Just focus on escaping," I barked at her. We turned again, away from the churning ground as roots came alive beneath Ginger like snakes moving in the earth. Fortunately, the Trent was too slow and didn't have enough range, and we soon left the living woods behind us. My aether sight could still clearly see the streaks in the canopy above as the pixies followed us. Thoughts of releasing the prisoners came to me, but that wouldn't guarantee our freedom, and I doubted Menashe would give them up now that she had them. Lines of daylight appeared through the trees. Maybe we were getting close to the grassy plains. It also made sense that Cleric Fiowasha and his warlord were racing away when we saw them. It wasn't because they wanted to get back quickly. They were likely fleeing for their lives. I thought we were getting close and our escape was assured. That was when a roar echoed in the woods, and I pulled Ginger up. Menashe followed suit, and the horses danced as they snorted to catch their breath. The roar came again, and I couldn't place the direction. It sounded like King Kong was wandering the woods. "What is that?" Menashe asked, her voice unsteady as she checked on her package. I gave her an annoyed look, as these woods were in her kingdom, not mine. I caught a streak of light zipping down behind us. Most likely the pixie was invisible, but my vision could see the ether. I placed an air shield in its path as it was targeting the cage on Menashe's horse, trying to free its brethren. The pixie thudded full speed into the shield and fell to the ground. It remained invisible, and Menashe was oblivious to its presence. It must have survived because it was still invisible. I swung from my saddle to the ground as the roars got louder. I scooped up the invisible pixie and stuffed it into one of my pouches that held my copper and silver coins. We didn't need a third pixie, but we might need the leverage if things went downhill, not that they were not already going that way. Also, truth be told, I didn't want the pixie stepped on by the horses as we prepared to take on whatever was charging at us. "Maybe it is time to break out the lightning," I hissed at Menashe as I drew the Major Bane. The next bestial roar was closer and sounded angry. It was also definitely coming from our escape path. The pixies above danced in anticipation, seeming to say, "You're in trouble now." I needed a moment. "There are ether lines here I can draw from," Menashe said, now standing beside me. Behind us, the treants were still stirring up the forest. In front of us was the beast, and the other direction would take us deeper into the woods and back to the other clerics battling the pixies. Why did everything always have to be so complicated? A large shadow thundered through the woods, and I relaxed. It was just a big-ass bear. I could remove its head, and the bear stood on its hind legs and pulled a massive axe from behind it. "What the?" I whispered as the bipedal bear broke into a run. "Where, bear?" Menashe said, shocked. It clicked in my mind. There were rare lycanthropes that could transform into bears. They were supposedly more friendly than werewolves, but this one seemed particularly unhappy with us. Probably because we were kidnapping his friends. The roaring bearman's charge spooked Menasha's gray stallion, and she lost control of the reins. The horse bolted into the woods. Our hard-earned cargo was going with it. The distraction also caused the cleric to interrupt her casting as she cursed. At least Ginger didn't bolt, but she did backpedal to stand behind me. I imagined Ginger saying, "You can have this one." I rapidly layered some air shields in front of me, as I prepared to take on the 9-foot monstrosity. 3 of the 4 air shields were destroyed on impact, but did their job as the upright bear was halted in his tracks, and the wind knocked from his lungs. He was stunned, and I stepped forward to slash into his shoulder. My jabane was a short blade, and its ether-infused edge cut like a razor, parting the werebear's matted fur. He took a moment to acknowledge the injury, and as he bellowed in pain and rage, I attacked his hamstring from the side. My slash didn't get good depth, and I was forced to retreat as the beast's axe came down. If the creature used ether, he would find it hard to control now. More importantly, he was slightly hobbled, and I glanced at Menasha, who was indecisive about going after her horse or fighting the werebear. "Lightning," I said, aggravated. Did she think I could handle a 1,000-pound bearman alone? "The pixies are lost. You are too close," she barked back. "Just do it," I yelled. The werebear's large, black, predatory eyes were locked onto me, and I didn't want to bottom out my aether to kill him. There were just too many unknowns ahead of us. The living forest, for one, was probably creeping closer as we were delayed here. A lasso of lightning lashed around the werebear's torso. He looked down, perplexed, but then his eyes widened in realization and fear. The chain lightning detached from Menasha and snapped to the werebear. I felt the concussive lightning explosion as the air became superheated and expanded just a few feet from me. My ears rang with pain and my nostrils inhaled ozone and the scent of burnt hair. A line of charred flesh circled the bearman's waist. His fur was burned away, and he was disoriented. I channeled my healing spell form as Magebane repeatedly cut into his thick, muscled limbs. The werebear collapsed, one leg and one arm useless. "Let's go," I yelled at Menasha. I didn't have time to kill the werebear and collect his essence. The hide was too thick and resistant, even to the runic weapon. The awakened forest was also moving closer. Menasha hadn't removed her clothes and was steaming something fierce from the large amount of aether she had pulled. I whistled, and Ginger came, somewhat reluctant after the cacophony of battle and magic. I swung up into the saddle and pulled Menasha behind me. "We have to go get the pixies," she said, looking in the direction her horse had fled. "No, we don't." I reached into my pouch and my hand grappled with the struggling pixie. I pulled it out as its tiny arms flailed against my fingers' superior strength. "You caught another one," she exclaimed as her arms wrapped around my waist to help keep her balance. I kicked Ginger into a gallop. This was the brave pixie who had tried to save the others, which I admired. One of its wings was creased like paper, probably from crashing into my air disc. Its small feminine features were scowling in rage and anger. I brushed aside its weak attempts to penetrate my mind. It was the same height as the others we had captured, maybe 6 inches in height, with shimmering wings that folded behind its back, currently trapped by my gloved fingers. Bouncing along, I carefully wrapped the pixie's wings back, as I had with the others. It only struggled momentarily before it relaxed, resigned to its fate. The human expression did make me feel guilty. Some quick bandage wrapping secured it in a cocoon. Then I stuffed the pixie back in the belt pouch so I wouldn't have to look at it. I didn't see any streaks or flashes above us, so the other pixies must be chasing down Menasha's gray stallion. We finally reached the edge of the woods, the grassy plains spreading before us. Gray skies dominated the late afternoon with a light drizzle, and my mood matched the landscape. We should race back to the elders. The others could overtake us at any time, Menasha encouraged me. "Ginger cannot run that distance carrying 2 people, I stated flatly. I realized it was likely that I was going to be walking back alone in a moment. "Someone is coming from the forest," Menasha warned me a few minutes later. I craned my neck to see 2 large black steeds thundering across the grass. We had just reached the road, and they overtook us not long after. Instead of riding past us, they slowed, most likely to gloat. The cleric had dark gray skin, and his leather clothing looked wet and coated in something sticky. They had not had a good time, but they still had 2 horses to our 1. "My Nasha, I am surprised to see you heading back. Giving up already?" Smugness oozed off the cleric. He had a crate on the back of his mount, which probably contained his prize. I hoped Menasha would navigate this situation with intelligence, and she did. "Sarkasha, I must admit I'm surprised you left your dog Nalgrasha behind. We had a harrowing encounter with a werebear that sent my mount into a panic before it bolted away. The crate and net I had secured to my saddlebags are now gone." Her voice carried a blend of remorse and frustration, a good acting job on her part. I pulled up Ginger to get the pair to stop as well. They complied, stopping to keep the gloating going. I just needed them to stop moving so I wouldn't kill the pixie I was trying to steal. "It is a pity you will not have a chance to lead us, but now you need to be more diplomatic in your future dealings and know when to get on your knees." Menasha's arms tightened around my waist in anger. My ether bottomed out, and the crate looked undisturbed from my vantage point, a successful theft. Hopefully the pixie was intact. Nasha spat on the ground, her tone getting slightly hostile. "If you are elevated to supreme, I will leave the caliphate permanently." Sarkasha laughed boisterously. "Please, you enjoyed our time together. Well, you should hurry along so you can watch me in the second trial. I believe Nalgrasha isn't far behind me." He turned his horse, and his warlord fell in beside him as they thundered down the road. "History?" I asked as I slid out of the saddle. Menasha looked at me questioningly. "An old lover," she hissed. Old was right, as Sarkasha had to be at least twice her age. I shrugged, as it was not my place to judge. "You need to get back quickly. Ginger is fast and will get you there before the others." I took the time to feed Ginger a pair of apples and explain her duty to her. My priority wasn't talking to my horse, but instead giving myself time to recover my ether. Just as Nasha was getting impatient, I produced the pixie. She looked confused, as it was wrapped in cordage and not bandages. It was also closer to 12 inches, rather than 6. Confusion was etched on her face. I didn't wait for her to sort it out, emptying one of the saddlebags. "Secure the pixie so they don't know you have it until you need to present it to the elders." I didn't make eye contact with the new pixie to avoid more guilt. Ginger was soon racing down the road after Sarkasha. I watched them disappear and realized I had a long 14-mile walk back. But first I would make a quick detour back to the woods to ease my guilty conscience. I didn't approach the tree line. Instead, I sank to one knee a short distance away. I pulsed my earth speak, but I was far enough away that it couldn't reach the woods. I pulled the irate fairy out of my belt pouch, her tiny eyes full of malice toward me. She had found her fight again and was trying to chew through my gloves with her tiny teeth. "I don't know if you can understand me or not, but this was not my idea. I am letting you go." Her tiny expression of hate didn't change, so I assumed she didn't understand. I unwrapped her quickly, stood, and stepped back. I waved my hand, indicating she was free to leave. She looked up at me defiantly and didn't move, probably thinking it was a trick. "Go, Tinker Bell." I shooed her away with a different gesture. The pixie's wings unfolded, but the damaged one fluttered oddly. She hissed at me like a snake and took to the air. She veered off immediately to the left as she tried to fly and crashed to the ground, tumbling through the grass and dirt in a tumble of tiny limbs and distressed shrieks. Of course, my act of conscience would go badly. The little fairy only needed to walk 50 yards to the trees. But instead, she tried twice more to fly and crashed both times. It was hard to watch, like watching a lame bird. So after the third crash, I moved to pick her up. As I stepped toward the pixie, a stiff, ominous breeze carried a metallic scent from the forest. The smart thing to do would be to walk away and let the pixie make her own way to the forest. I felt something watching from inside the woods, judging me. If it was another pixie, hopefully it would read my good intentions. I took another step and knelt, holding out my hand toward the wounded pixie. The injured pixie seemed to consider my offered hand, the scowl on her face relaxing. With my other hand, a Pathfinder healing potion appeared. I was reasonably confident it would work on pixies and used my thumb to break the seal. The foul odor of spoiled milk hung in the air. The pixie sneezed and then covered her face, as if about to retch. She was not going to drink it. Hell, I would only drink one if I was going to die. Then I noticed a squirrel high in the branches watching us. It might be the one we encountered when we first entered the woods, but I could not be sure. My pixie looked into the woods at the squirrel, and then back to the potion, a disgusted look on her face. She came forward and reluctantly stepped onto my hand, her scowl returning. I saw the pixie clearly and up close in the fading evening light. With her pointed ears and pale skin, she really did look like a miniature elf. Her silky red-brown hair was disheveled from her rough treatment and from crashing into the ground. She was wearing clothes woven from thin blades of dried grass. Her translucent wings shimmered, then suddenly folded behind her and seemed to disappear. With my other hand, I slowly tilted the healing potion. Her tiny hands unenthusiastically grasped the opening as the brew spilled slowly out. She sputtered, coughed, and hissed as she tried to drink the smelly concoction. She pushed away from the vial when she had her fill and fell backward onto her rump in my hand, coughing. I hid a smirk as I stood slowly, holding my hand up toward the woods. The fairy vomited onto my hand in one last act of revenge before her wings splayed out, and she took to the air, this time zipping around my head once and spitting at me before darting into the woods. I guess I was not going to get a thank you. I looked for the squirrel, but it was already gone. My act of kindness done, I stepped away from the woods and started to walk back toward the road. I hadn't walked long before I noticed 2 mounted orcs bolting from the woods further down the road. I quickly held up my spyglass to see which cleric and warlord they were. It was Warlord Rook and Cleric Jerkasha. This angered me, since they had Zorana. But it looked like they would be the final pair to pass the first trial unless someone else had snuck past us. But were they the last ones, or were Warlord Batail and Cleric Nalgrasha still in the woods? I kept checking over my shoulder, wondering. I didn't have to wait much longer. As the last 2 Orciers came thundering down the road less than 10 minutes later, I stepped to the side, content to let them pass. They didn't slow, and the Warlord's horse veered into my path. I could have made his life miserable with layered air shields, but I moved further from the road to avoid being accidentally run down. They looked at me disdainfully as they passed. I couldn't affect the trial outcome any more than I already had, and let the smug and haughty orcs go without taking any action. I was over 2 miles down the road when Manasha's gray stallion caught up to me. I had missed its approach and was shocked when it arrived. Its saddle and packs were missing, but the bridle remained. I wondered if the pixies had sent the horse to me or if it had wandered to me alone. The stallion nudged me, and I understood that he wanted an apple for being so loyal. After he consumed the delicious apple, I checked his bridle to find that it was cut in a number of places, ready to break with a hard pull. His bare back was slick like oil, even though it looked clean. The pixies had been eager to get some revenge. At least his shoes seemed in good condition and had not been tampered with. It took some time to wipe off the invisible oil. I hoped the pixies were watching from somewhere, frustrated that their tricks hadn't worked. I pulled out some cordage from my dimensional space and fashioned a temporary bridle, tossing the damaged one on the side of the road. I climbed onto the horse and rode bareback to the valley. I realized that I hadn't done as good a job as I had thought in cleaning off the oil. It was a challenge to stay on the gray horse. My thighs burned from holding myself on the gray, and I couldn't spur him into anything more than a fast walk as night descended on us. I reached the entrance to the valley, well past sunset. The orcs at the outposts looked at me, seeming amused in the light of a glowstone, probably thinking I had been ditched and was coming back in disgrace. I ignored them as I went into the valley to find out the first trial's results. The stone building where we met the elders in the morning was closed, with 2 pathfinders standing guard. Rather than try to gain entry, I returned to our longhouse to see if Maveth, Glasha, Tanasha, and Manasha were there. As soon as I dismounted, I healed my screaming thighs and walked a gray into the longhouse. The 3 clerics were around the fire with Maveth cooking something. They all looked up, and Maveth had a huge grin on his face. "You are back." He abandoned his cooking efforts and walked over to me, embracing me. I saw her. I looked irately at Glasha and Tanasha. "Maveth, you didn't," Glasha grunted. He wouldn't sit still until he saw her. I let him see through my spell sight. Uncomfortable for both of us. They are not aware of the connection between the Goliaths. I nodded and hoped that was the case. If they found out we were here for Zarana, it would give them leverage. Well, good then. Thanks for coming to look for me, I replied tersely. After Ginger got her apple reward for carrying Menashe back, I made to rub down the gray. We could not leave the valley. The choosing is still going on. Glasha reminded me. I just grunted. Maveth joined me and helped. He whispered loudly, I saw Myra too. She looks defeated, Eric. We need to save her as well. I nodded and I patted the big man's shoulder. Don't worry, we will not leave without them. They are never out of the sight of others, so I think our best course right now is to make Menashe the supreme. If I fail in that, we can try something more drastic. Thank you. I do not doubt you are capable of changing the cleric's fate, Mavith intoned. Fate? I asked, confused. The supreme is able to decide the fate of the other candidates, according to Glasha. Otherwise, there would be too many candidates to count. It is how Tarnasha was exiled and cut off from his allies. Mavith's words gave some weight to this competition. It made me respect Menashe more, knowing the cleric was betting on herself. Knowing orc honor, she wouldn't be killed, but I suspected the new supreme would give her undesirable tasks. Is Menashe still among the candidates? Not eliminated? I asked the orcs. They had not told me if the pixie had been successfully delivered. With his Orshish grin splitting his face, Tarnasha happily informed me. She is. Cleric Fioasha and Cleric Yorakasha were the other two successful candidates, although Cleric Sarkasha accused Menashe of cheating and stealing their pixie. It took an hour before we convinced the elders that even if it was Sarkasha's pixie, it was within the rules. Some of my favorite elders were foaming at the mouth by the end. Tarnasha's joy got a slight grin from me. How did you do it? Menashe asked interestedly, bringing me some of the food Maveth had prepared. How did you steal their pixie? She asked more pointedly. All three looked interested in my reply, but I ignored the three orchies' questioning gazes. What happened to the 5 pixies? It is just 4. They are caged in the elder's residence. Their wings have already been removed, Glasha stated dismissively. I winced at the cruel treatment. Even though I knew how valuable the wings were to alchemists, I hoped they didn't plan to exsanguinate them for their blood as well. Well, if you win the choosing, release them, I said firmly, locking eyes with Menashe. Pixies are a nuisance, Menashe started. She will release them if they have not been harvested, Glasha said, interrupting Menashe and nodding to me. I think the chronicler understood my compassion. Most likely they will not go to the alchemists until after the choosing is completed. Did you make a pact with the pixies for their freedom? She added curiously. No, I just feel bad that we abducted them from their homes for a stupid contest, I said truthfully. The other candidates likely killed a number of pixies, Tarnasha said offhandedly. The pixies will not leave the woods for vengeance, if that is what you fear. A sizable ley line runs underneath those woods. They are much weaker the further they are from it. The horrific thought of what essence a pixie might yield to increase my own power occurred to me. I discarded the idea. They were not my enemies, and killing a sentient creature that didn't intend me harm was malicious. What about the next trial? I asked, finishing with the horses and taking the steaming onion and potato soup from Nasha. It will be announced tomorrow at midday. The elders need time to find a proper task that only Fioasha can succeed at, Tarnasha said sardonically. Will the Supreme be chosen after the next task? I asked. The soup was salty but otherwise good. I nodded my thanks to Maveth, who was distracting himself once again with stitching. Tarnasha let out a tired sigh. Unlikely. Most likely, they will only choose to eliminate one candidate, just in case something unforeseen happens. Then there will be a final trial for the seat of the Supreme. Probably something that will pit the candidates and their warlords against each other. I rested peacefully for a few hours, and at dawn Menashe was summoned alone. I recognized the warlord who came to retrieve her. It was Warlord Krag, the one who had withdrawn his support for Cleric Atasha, and whom Menashe had rejected when he offered to be her first. The warlord did not seem angry or smug, at least. Only the 3 remaining candidates are allowed to meet with the elders. They will be assessed on a tablet reader before the second trial is announced, he informed Glasha patiently for the 3rd time. Her first should be allowed to accompany her. Tarnasha barked angrily at the warlord, who just shook his head helplessly. I am just delivering the message, Kraj said. I suspected why they wanted to assess the candidates. The elders didn't want any more surprises. They were also probably trying to figure out how Menashe had stolen the pixie. As long as they didn't try to assess me, I didn't care. The warlord exhaled a low, slow breath. You have done well stirring the hornet's nest, Menashe. I learned last night that Cleric Nalgrasha and Sarkasha were working with Fioasha and the elders. They planned to be the other candidates arriving with the pixies, and were going to step down from consideration after the first trial. The choosing might have ended yesterday if they were successful. Now there are 3 remaining candidates who all want to assume the Supreme's mantle. That news shocked my 3 clerics, and they began to interrogate Warlord Kraj for more information. He didn't know much, but the 30-plus warlords in the valley talked to each other as they awaited the new Supreme's coronation. Eventually, Menashe was escorted to the elders by the warlord. I did note that he studied me for a time, probably trying to figure out what I had that he didn't. From experience, I knew it was never fun being the last one picked on the playground. Glasha and Tarnasha were anxious while they waited. I tuned out their conversation. To distract myself, I cleaned up the open stalls and walked the horses outside to water them. This farce of a choosing should be over soon enough, and I needed to start planning how to abduct Zarana. From what I had overheard, it was clear that the elders were not going to allow Menashe to ascend to the supreme seat. It was well past midday when Menashe returned. She looked a little haggard. We all sat around the fire while she talked. They tested us on a tablet reader, and then we were asked to demonstrate our spell forms for them. I was the only one tested so thoroughly that I drained my ether core. That got an angry glare from Glasha. When do they announce the second trial? Glasha asked, steel in her voice. Tonight, at sunset. It will likely begin right after they announce it, she replied tiredly. Glasha hissed. You won't have time to recover. Foulness. I hope a lustful ogre invades their beds tonight. I had to listen to the orcs lament the unfairness of it all. But what did they really expect? From what I had seen, this was how orc politics worked. When we led the horses to the elders' central stone building, dozens of tattooed orcs and clerics formed a ring around the 6 elders. I had missed the announcement of the first trial, so I assumed it had looked similar to this. Warlord Rook stood next to Cleric Jorakasha, facing the elders in the large circle. We joined them, and soon, Cleric Fioasha and Warlord Etus joined us, completing the list of candidates. I was surprised at how quiet it was with all these powerful warriors and clerics of the Caliphate around us. I could feel their eyes on my back. Was it respect or anticipation? After last night, they clearly knew that Cleric Fioasha was destined to lead them soon, and they were here to pay their respects and see how events played out in his favor. I felt something brush my mind briefly, though it retreated when I focused on it. Was that one of the elders or a cleric in the crowd? I scanned the alien faces, but there were too many. I saw curiosity, disdain, anger, and a myriad of other emotions as I met their eyes. The same elder who had taken such joy in tricking us stepped forward. She was more reserved this evening. Esteemed warlords and clerics of the Caliphate, the weathered and aged orc bellowed, her voice booming across the vast assembly with the obvious aid of magic. Her deep-set eyes scanned the gathering, ensuring that her message reached every powerful figure present. The second trial will rigorously test the candidates' fortitude, intelligence, mastery of the aetheric arts, and even their diplomacy. A tense silence enveloped the group of formidable leaders, their expressions stoic and contemplative. The faint rustle of leather and the muffled sounds of restless horses outside the circle hung in the air. They must climb the spire and claim an artifact of one of the inhabitants. Only the first 2 candidates to return successful will be allowed in the third and final trial of the choosing. This announcement broke the silence and caused the circle to erupt into a chorus of soft, harsh whispers. The elder wore a smug smile, probably knowing that the elders could always dismiss whatever was brought back as counterfeit. What is the spire and what lies there? I asked quietly. It is a lone mountain on the northernmost point of the continent, she whispered. The last of the ancient storm giants live there, but the Caliphate has a pact to never disturb them. It makes no sense to upset the accord. Judging by the confident looks on the elders, I was sure it made perfect sense to them. Cleric Fioasha comes from a village at its base, Menashe added with realization and a little anger. Of course he does, I said sarcastically. Don't worry. I have fought a storm giant before. Granted, I wouldn't say the encounter went well, and I think our best option when we see one is to run as fast and far away as we can. Nasha gawked at me, not knowing if I was being serious. Horses were already being led into the circle, and the others were mounting and riding away. I noted irritably that their saddlebags were bursting with supplies, so they had been forewarned of the long trek. How far is it to this spire? I asked as I swung up into Ginger's saddle. 4 days' hard ride from here. We don't have supplies, and I have never been there myself, Menashe said tersely. I translated 4 days' hard ride into 200 miles away in my head. Maveth parted the crowd so Glasha and Tarnasha could reach us. Clerics and Supremes have climbed the spire before, Glasha said as she joined us in hushed conversation. They sought the Titan's wisdom. Be respectful and deferential if you meet one, and they will likely not kill you. Why do we have to meet them? I asked, frowning. Because all the easily retrieved artifacts are long gone, she said assertively. I've reviewed the records from past expeditions myself. If the Elders made a pact with the Titans to allow only their chosen candidate to leave you, we'll need to be cautious. I had a few sarcastic retorts ready, but bit my tongue. Now wasn't the time. Maveth, I said, meeting his eyes. Don't do anything until I return. Maveth was my biggest concern as his anxiety was evident. He nodded slowly, but I was not reassured. We only have enough supplies for a day, Menashe pointed out. I've got it handled. I nudged Ginger forward. The crowd parted as we moved to catch the others. We raced out of the valley, and Ginger was the only one happy about the urgency. Menashe was eager to overtake the others, but it would be 4 long days in the saddle. Maybe it was my cynicism about the trials, but I was confident that Fioasha would probably just have to walk into his old village, be handed an artifact, and ride back. We can stop in a village this evening and get supplies, Menashe said as she galloped beside me. I suspected the nearest villages might have been warned about my Nasha and would not offer timely aid. There is no need. I have enough food for us and the horses to get us to the mountain. She looked surprised, but I didn't want her to dwell on my dimensional space. I was prepared for this eventuality, I said dismissively. Thinking ahead to possible problems, I asked, Is there a trail going up the spire for the horses? The lightning cleric bounced beside me in her saddle, assessing me again before replying. I believe the summit is only accessible on foot, but I have never been there. Some of the past Supremes used to make a pilgrimage to seek the wisdom of the giants. I know not all of them returned. That was not what I wanted to hear. If there was lore about dealing with the storm giants, perhaps we should have spent some time talking with Glasha before we left. The road was familiar as we headed north, but we soon turned off the main road to follow a lesser road that paralleled the coast. It should be easy to find the spire, as it was on the northernmost tip of the continent. When we took our first break at a spring to water the horses, I pulled out meat buns for us and grain to go with the grass the horses were eating. Of course, Ginger also needed an apple for her hard work. Menashe's appetite was satiated with a second meat bun. We have rested long enough, Menashe said anxiously after just 1/3 of an hour had passed. There is no point in rushing and risking injury to the horses, I said, not moving. She studied me a moment before reluctantly retaking her seat on a log. I nodded to her. What else do you know about the spire and the residents? It is the last known enclave of storm giants on Dizia. They are thousands of years old if the stories are true. Sometimes a Supreme will visit them, seeking wisdom or lost knowledge, she replied, offering the same knowledge she had before. She had also mentioned that sometimes the Supremes wouldn't return. What type of knowledge would cause a Supreme to risk their lives? Menashe bit her lip in thought. I don't know. I think the art of tattooing was passed down from the storm giants. That is fascinating. How do the tattoos work? I asked conversationally. It is a secret of the Caliphate, she stated. She seemed to reconsider. The elves have appropriated the knowledge, but have not utilized it, to our understanding. For your loyalty, you have earned the right to know the secret as well. Menashe moved in front of me and sat on the grass, much closer than she needed to be. I think she was afraid of being overheard while revealing the tattoo secrets. The tattoos are a blessing. and a curse for those marked with them. You cannot imprint spells on your ether core if you are tattooed. Instead, you wear your spell forms on your skin. I interrupted with a question. What if you already have a spell form on your core before you are tattooed? She frowned at being interrupted. It would be blocked and unusable, permanently lost. The tattoos draw your ether from your core in a chaotic current. Then, why get tattoos at all? Spell forms are much more flexible, I replied, drinking from my canteen. Menashe looked a little indecisive for a moment, but eventually, she revealed the truth. There are benefits. For instance, the spell forms that can be tattooed can be of any affinity, not just affinities you are strong enough to create a spell form for. That was interesting, since affinities were rare. How does that work? Menashe inhaled deeply and exhaled slowly as she revealed the secret of the Caliphate warriors. The ink the tattoos are made of holds the affinity of the spell form, transmuting the raw other. It is common knowledge that we use essences for the ink, but I will not reveal the other ingredients required to make the ink. Another benefit is that the warrior does not need to master controlling their ether. They just squeeze their ether core to release the ether. Their saturated body naturally pulls it to the tattoos, activating the spell forms. Something occurred to me. The warriors must activate all their tattoos at once then? She looked a little uncertain. For most, that is the case, power all or none. It is rare for a warrior to be able to focus their ether into just one tattoo, but it is not unheard of. The tattooist must also be highly skilled in ether shaping to keep them separated with the turbulent ether. What do the tattoos do? I already knew what they did from my hound training, but I was curious about what my Nasha would tell me. Once again, she looked hesitant to tell me, but eventually answered my question. A Pathfinder will have 2 or 3 tattoos focused on stealth, while one of our elite warriors typically just has one that is focused on either strength or speed. She grudgingly explained a little further when I waited for her to continue. Our elites usually have tiny aether cores, so they cannot sustain more than one tattoo for long. Giving them 2 just shortens their combat effectiveness. And the warlords? I asked, already guessing her answer. 3 or 4 and rarely 5. There is only so much space on the body, and the skill of the tattoo artist comes into play to avoid overlapping with other tattoos. A warlord always has the 3 tattoos: speed, strength, and endurance. Beyond that, it varies depending on what the tattooist has mastered, Menashe explained. Something occurred to me. What ingredient in the ink is found in the warlord dungeon? Her jaw dropped open like I had uncovered one of the Caliphate's greatest secrets. Her jaw moved, but no words came. It made sense in my mind that if a warlord needed to complete the dungeon, then it had to be a secret to their power. Demon Horn, she said after a long pause. How did you know? I shrugged. It was obvious. It is the only dungeon in the Caliphate that outsiders and adventurers are not allowed into. I ask that you do not spread this even if you think it is obvious, Menashe said tersely. My people have feeble aether shaping skills. We have 1/10 of the number of clerics that the elves have mages and 1/4 of that of humans. Raising our best warriors with the tattoos is the only way to defend our lands. If others started tattooing their weaker warriors, she left the rest unspoken. I was not going to make any guarantees about that, but I nodded slowly in understanding. We can leave now, I said, standing. We were soon back on the coastal road, passing small fishing settlements. When night encroached, we dismounted and walked the horses, rather than divert, to rest in a town. By morning, Menashe was stumbling, and I offered her the pea-green Pathfinder potions of stamina. I had 10 left and didn't need them, as I also had 4 elven stamina potions that tasted much better. Each vomit-tasting concoction worked for about 8 hours, increasing alertness and invigorating you with a powerful stimulant. I was surprised when Menashe immediately downed the potion and belched a foul air. She seemed to like the taste, and my opinion of orc gastronomy suddenly plummeted. Soon, she was alert again, and we continued our ride. We had short conversations over the next 2 days. I learned Warlord Rook had 5 tattoos: strength, speed, stamina, self-healing, and toughness. The toughness tattoo fortified his organs and skin against attacks. He was also one of the few warlords skilled enough to activate individual tattoos. Warlord Edis, who was the first of Fioasha, had 5 as well: Strength, speed, stamina, water breathing, and a gust of wind. Since he was an admiral of the Northern Fleet, it made sense that he had chosen the latter too. He was also capable of activating specific tattoos. It was good to know your enemy's strengths, but Menashe seemed to think there would not be a direct confrontation between our groups. I doubted that orc honor would hold when so much was at stake. By the third day, even Ginger was eager for a rest. "How are you still going? I never observed you consuming a potion," Menashe asked me during one of our spells of walking the horses. She was stumbling from both fatigue and soreness. "Human constitution," I replied to the cleric, who once again reassessed me. "But we do need to rest, at least for a time. The horses are beginning to stumble, and we don't want them to come up lame." Reluctantly, Menashe agreed. We took refuge in a small, isolated farm, where we gave the old farmer a large silver coin in exchange for staying in his hay shed. The farmer and cleric asserted that payment was unnecessary, but I insisted. Even I needed rest. We all bedded down after a meal, and I found myself drifting off to sleep. My dreams were not pleasant, as I confronted ancient storm giants who somehow pulled the truth from me about my role in killing one of their number. I ended up flattened underfoot and woke in a sweat. I returned to sleep and used my experience in the dreamscape to try and twist the nightmare into something more palatable. The best I could do was grow myself to match the size of the storm giants and wrestle them into submission. Menashe shook me awake. It has been almost half a day. My hand was on my blade. I couldn't believe I had slept for so long, but it was already morning. Even the horses had been so exhausted that they hadn't stirred during the night. We unbarred the door and I spent some time mucking out the shed, as it was not intended to stable horses. Menashe didn't understand my insistence on cleaning up after us, but explaining how a guest should act was useless, as she was used to being venerated by the common people. The rest of the ride to the spire was strenuous for the horses and Menashe, but the only environmental issue was a warm, steady rain on the third day. When the spire came into view, it was awe-inspiring, jutting out of the distant landscape into the sky. It looked to be an isolated, narrow mountain with a ring of clouds around it. Faint flashes of lightning in the clouds could be seen even in the brightness of day. We paused to admire the odd sight. It felt ominous and uninviting. "Having second thoughts?" I asked, turning to the cleric. Menashe stared for a moment, maybe reconsidering. "No, oh well. My people need me. I will continue on this path," we continued, and the rocky grasslands started to show flocks of sheep as we approached the spire. A town began to emerge in the distance, and Nasha indicated it. "That is Rosenrock. That is where Fiawasha grew up." It was still a few miles from the spire, and didn't have even a wooden wall surrounding the 20-odd stone buildings with thatched roofs. We walked our horses into town and were greeted by someone I recognized as a cleric. The orc wore worn leathers and wore a tusky smile while he greeted us. "Cleric Menashe, it is an honor to meet you." "I am Cleric Wulasha." He bowed his head in respect. "Cleric Glasha sent word to meet you and help you. Cleric Fiawasha and Cleric Joarkasha have already started the climb with their firsts." In disbelief, Menashe exploded. "How did they get here ahead of us?" I was still hung up on the fact that their firsts had accompanied them. I had thought, or maybe hoped, that Menashe would climb the spire alone. Wulasha smiled conciliatorily as he relayed the bad news. "Cleric Fiawasha grew up here. I know he can wash away fatigue for himself and others. Cleric Joarkasha can do something similar, holding fatigue at bay, but only for himself." I could see the frustration boiling over in Menashe. "Cleric Joarkasha is only a few hours ahead of you. Fiawasha is half a day ahead. If you wish, I will take care of your horses. The ascent is too treacherous and narrow for them." I really didn't want to trust this stranger with the care of Ginger. If they were lying about being on our side and something happened to Ginger, I wouldn't be able to restrain my vengeance. "Your mount will be safe with me," he said, as if reading my mind. "On my honor, your horses will be well cared for, even if you do not return. It is just 3 miles to the start of the trail." He indicated behind him. "If you want to rest, I will have my acolytes prepare something for you." "Yes," I answered before Menashe could. "We will rest for an hour before starting out. We would appreciate it if you could tell us whatever you can about the spire." Selfishly, I had hoped the other 2 candidates would have already returned before our ascent, and we could turn around, avoiding the risk of facing the storm giants altogether. Menashe slowly nodded. Another hour to possibly gain valuable knowledge would be wise. Menashe was impatient as we sat, and were served by young orc attendants in drab, grey robes. The local cleric's house was humble but cozy. Wulasha sipped some pungent tea. "I will tell you what I can. I will tell you what I can. It is a challenging climb, and the task the elders have set forth is difficult. I suspect Fiosha might know a few places where he might find an artifact without summiting the spire and confronting the ancients." Ancients? I asked, puzzled. The cleric nodded ardently. "That is what we call the oldest of the storm giants. They come here to live out their last days, even though that may be centuries. We do not know how long they actually live, though there is one storm giant that has been around since the founding of the Caliphate," Wulasha replied instructively. I interjected with a pertinent question. "What is the name of that storm giant?" If it became a foobar situation, maybe knowing the name would be useful. "Krusos," the cleric replied earnestly. That sounded familiar. "Kronos?" I questioned. "No, Krusos," he said patiently, sounding out the name a few times for me. Perhaps the translation or passage of time had altered the giant's name. Kronos was Latin, after all. He waited till I was satisfied before continuing. "Now, the spire has been called many things over the years. The crown, due to the persistent lightning storm surrounding the summit. Death's home, since that is where the storm giants go to die, and most who venture to climb it never return. And Wisdom Peak by Supreme Analasha, who centuries ago visited the Titans on more than 5 occasions. But the Titans call it Olympia, and you should use that name if you plan to converse with them." My blood chilled. There were just too many similarities to Greek legends to be a coincidence. Menashe didn't see or sense my unease. "Can't we find an artifact without confronting the Titans?" Nasha asked, a little distressed. At least she was smart in not wanting to risk an encounter with the giants. Wulasha nodded. "That is probably wisest. You may come across some relics during your climb, but most will be too large to carry back with you." Fiosha used to climb the spire as a youth. Not to the summit, but it was considered brave among the young men and women to explore the lower paths. Like I said, he most likely knows where artifacts are easily accessible on the lower slopes. Menashe clenched her fists in frustration. What did she expect? The elders probably consulted Fiosha before assigning the task. They likely required something sufficiently dangerous to announce to the assembled warlords and clerics. It was either admirable or naive that she still thought she had a chance to come out on top of the choosing. She regained her composure. "What do you suggest we do if we have to climb to the summit?" I clenched my jaw. She had used the word "we." I did not want to climb to the summit. I could accompany her partway. But it was her task to convince the Titans to relinquish an artifact, not mine. I wondered if we could have cheated and just used one of the buttons we had uncovered in the plains. I wished I had thought about it before we left. But Glasha did say she registered them with her superiors. "If you do summit, announce yourselves. Do not be foolish and try to sneak in and steal something." The last of the storm giants wield powerful magic, the likes of which can erase cities from maps. I could attest to that, having seen a single storm giant excavate a massive crater in a swamp. "We should go," Menashe said, standing determinedly. She was done waiting. I stood slowly and handed the cleric a handful of silver and a bag of apples. "For my mare, 1 apple a day. If I don't return, explain my fate to her." He looked at me, perplexed, but took the coin and apples. The walk to the spire was a lightly worn path through the rocky grassland. A number of sheep paused in their meal to watch us, and I could read their minds. They were thinking we were idiots for heading toward the ominous tower of stone in the distance. After trekking a few miles through rocky terrain, we finally arrived at the base of the spire. The mountain loomed above us, its colossal form becoming more imposing with each step we took. When we stood at its base, we were met with an astonishingly sheer cliff that seemed to extend impossibly into the sky. It was an awe-inspiring sight that defied nature. "This feels artificial." I breathed softly in the cold but humid air. Around us, massive blocks of stone were partially buried in the ground like ancient, fallen sentinels. The entire site was reminiscent of Devil's Tower back on Earth. My companion dismissed my remark and veered onto the worn path to the right, each step echoing on the damp stone. A gentle mist drizzled down from the swirling clouds overhead. After a few moments of following the cliff, we found ourselves standing before magnificent stone towers that loomed on either side of the wide path. The ancient giants had clearly crafted these colossal structures themselves. The tower surfaces were adorned with faded pictographs, time-worn symbols that hinted at a long-lost language. The sheer size of the towers made me feel tiny in comparison. They were living testaments to a bygone era where the Titans ruled. We paused briefly, taking in the breathtaking view. The uneven stone path before us wound upward, curling around a massive spire that loomed overhead. Menashe, determined, stepped forward, passing between the two tall structures. As we moved past them, the extent of the tower's damage became obvious. Their once imposing facades bore the marks of a fierce attack. Large chunks of stone had fallen away, leaving gaping holes. I sent a few earth pulses out, hoping that perhaps an artifact would be buried within easy access to end this expedition early. But there was nothing. The abandoned towers appeared to be made primarily of solid stone, with space for defenders on just the top floor. I continued to pulse my earth speak as we climbed the path, hoping to find something. At first I was confused as to why we had been told to leave our mounts. But after we had ascended a few hundred feet, we saw that a large portion of the path had fallen away, and a fresh, narrow path had been carved into the cliff at specific points. I needed to turn sideways to walk the ledge, and the horses would have stood no chance of making it past. I guessed that the Titans had done this on purpose to prevent large forces from scaling the spire en masse. When we reached the far side of the spire, the ocean was hundreds of feet below us. It felt surreal, as the clouds that circled the tower were still so far above us, making a persistent mist that made the stones slippery. It would take hours to reach the top of the tower, judging by the gradual grade of the spiraling path. An hour later we encountered a second portion of the path that had fallen away. The carved-out walkway was even narrower this time. I briefly wondered if the storm giants could just leap the 20-foot span of the missing path. Shortly after passing this section, we encountered another tower centered in the path. This tower had mostly crumbled with time or from an attack, and we had to scramble over the rubble. On the other side was water runoff from above, and the muddy sediment on the path clearly showed 4 sets of footprints. "Why don't we just wait here and take whatever artifact one of the others recovers?" I asked Menashe. "That would not be honorable," she said dismissively. I wasn't joking, though. We had stolen a pixie. What was different about an artifact? I suddenly got a little angry at the convoluted orc honor. I might have yelled a little in my retort. "And setting up this trial so Fuasha has all the advantages is honorable? You must realize that you have no chance of assuming the mantle of the Supreme and leading your people. This is all just a dog and pony show to make it look like there was a selection process." Menashe winced at my verbal assault but didn't back down, showing some spine. "I understand what you think." She pointed to the prints in the mud. "But that is proof Fuasha is ascending the spire. That alone tells me he has honor. He may be better prepared for this trial, but he is not dishonorable. If you do not want to stand by my side, just return to town and feed your horse apples while you wait for me to return. Okay." I spun and started to scramble back over the rubble. I slowed when I reached the top of the pile and looked back. Menashe was gone. She had continued without me. Did I feel guilty? Maybe a little bit, but following her seemed foolish. Adrian had once told me, "You cannot save everyone, Eric," which felt applicable now. Then why did I turn around after 15 minutes and follow the cleric? Menashe was the best way to get Mavith's sister back without a fight. I walked slower than I needed to, hoping to come to my senses, but it never happened. I climbed over 2 more ruined towers before entering the misty clouds that contained crackling lightning. With my earth speak, I could walk forward confidently without having to worry about falling to my death if I encountered a portion of collapsed trail. That was probably why I caught up to Menashe, who was hugging the cliff face and testing the path carefully with each step as she traversed the mist. I stayed 50 feet back, not announcing myself. When the mist cleared for her, she resumed walking. I waited in the mist to let her get ahead again before following. The halo of clouds was now below me as I circled the tower, and it looked like I was not far from the top. At least, it didn't look like the cliff went on forever above me. The air was definitely a lot colder, and my manticore cloak was soon draped on my shoulders. My earth pulses picked up the coming summit before my eyes did. Nasha had stopped at the end of the winding path. It had taken most of the day to climb, and Neptune's tear was coming out with the fading sun. It was a little disconcerting that neither of the other candidates had passed us, returning with their artifacts. I had seen other signs that they were ahead of us: piss and shit on the path, scraps of discarded food, a discarded empty water skin, and footprints in soft mud. Menashe was frozen and didn't move around the bend for a long time. I was curious about what had made her pause. I silently edged forward until I could see her. She stood between two smaller pillars, gazing out at the summit. I walked slowly to stand by her side. She didn't acknowledge me, as if she had expected me to join her. She was still mesmerized by what she was seeing. "Thought you might be hungry," I said, handing her a meat pie. Menashe took the offered food, as she had not been carrying any supplies. I handed her a canteen next, as it had been a strenuous climb and she had to be dehydrated. I finally got to see what had given her pause. A shallow green valley extended across the caldera. It was maybe 3 miles across to the far side, but a few white buildings could be seen among the colossal trees. It didn't look like paradise, but it definitely felt out of place in its surroundings. Even the cold air that had dominated the last hour of the climb was gone, replaced with warm, moist air coming from the valley below. Menashe was obviously hungry. By the time I had taken in the view, she had finished the bun and drunk the entire canteen. I saw 2 of the storm giants in that clearing there not too long ago. She pointed to an open space in front of one of the white buildings. "Did you see either of the other candidates?" I asked. "No, but Wulasha said we shouldn't try to sneak in. I was waiting for one of the storm giants to come to me." I didn't have a response, as he had indeed advised that. I pulled my spyglass to my hand and scanned the valley slowly. At least 4 clearings had 4 large white stone structures that reminded me of Greek architecture. "Do you see anything?" she asked. "Just a few aurochs in the far field," I replied after scanning again to make sure. "Maybe we need to announce ourselves," Menashe said. "Don't go doing anything drastic," I started to say, but she had already extended her hands toward the sky. 2 thick bolts of lightning extended into the sky, followed by a crack of rolling thunder. Well, she certainly knew how to announce herself. It didn't take long before a giant emerged from one of the buildings, paused, turned toward us, and then started to walk in our direction. I doubted it would take him long to cover the distance. The storm giant didn't seem to be moving with haste to meet us, but his long strides quickly carried him through the trees and along a path that wound down into the valley from where we stood. The giant paused, looking up at us before beginning the climb. Maybe he thought we had smartened up and fled. I was expecting an ancient-looking storm giant, but as he approached, he was barely over 10 feet tall, and lacked the time-worn beard and blue-gray skin tones I anticipated from my first encounter with his race. His pale gray face would have seemed youthful if I didn't have to crane my neck to make eye contact. The giant was dressed in leather and wool garments, all of which were dyed a deep blue. His gray eyes watched us, waiting. "Do you speak storm giant?" I asked Menashe, who stood confidently. "No," she replied, and bowed to the giant. In Orshish, she spoke to the giant. "We come as friends and to request an audience and a blessing." The skin of the giant reminded me of Mavidus, though the giant was much leaner of build than the Goliath. "Are you with the others?" His coarse voice grumbled out in rough Orsish. I relaxed a little, thinking that perhaps this interaction might be cordial rather than a life-or-death encounter. Menashe considered her response carefully. "No, but we are here for the same thing. We request the gift of an inconsequential artifact." The giant's gray eyes studied us before he spoke. "You can still depart and descend Olympia, or you may follow me to stand before Chrysos for judgment." His tone was flat and uncaring, making the situation all the more ominous. We were a curiosity to him, but he did not care if we lived or died. Pessimistically, I thought if we entered the valley, and they decided we might make a good snack, escape was going to be nearly impossible. "Is our safety guaranteed?" I asked. "No," the giant said with a slight smirk that faded immediately. "But you will be allowed to speak," he grumbled out. Then he chose to add a little snide comment. "How much depends on what you say." I was not liking giant humor. "We will meet with Crusos," Menashe affirmed. I was not so confident about the "we" part. Still, I fell in beside Menashe as we followed the short giant. The gravel path to the caldera was steep, and would have been easier with steps, in my opinion. Old, long-abandoned fortifications lined the path as we descended. From what I observed, I thought that the storm giants didn't seem worried about being attacked in this refuge. That didn't make much sense to me, but it would be difficult for an army to scale the spire. Maybe they would be warned if a threat approached. "When did you know we were climbing the spire?" I asked our escort. The giant looked down at me, his foot briefly slipping on gravel. He was not at risk of losing his footing, however, because he had remarkable balance even for his size. Ephemeris was aware as soon as you passed the gatehouse. That sent a chill up my spine. They had probably been watching us ascend. They didn't think us a threat, or they would have intercepted us on the climb. Why chase the lambs when they can come to you for slaughter? As we reached the valley, a thick grass carpet with scattered large hardwood trees appeared ahead of us. I could see a foraging auroch in the trees. This close, I could tell that it was larger than the specimens I had seen in my travels. Its shoulders matched our escort in height. "How many storm giants live on Olympia?" I asked, not expecting an answer. Logistically, I was wondering how many giants this relatively small valley could support. The escort looked at me as we walked and answered, 5 storm giants reside here, but the stone giants tend Olympia. There are 11 of us," he said the last pointedly, clearly wanting credit for maintaining this veil above the clouds. It made sense that our escort was not a storm giant. I didn't get an imposing ancient aura feeling from him. Menashe was surprisingly calm and asked politely, "And what is your name?" "I am Menashe. And my companion is Eric. I am Lampter, son of Hesper and Lethargia," he proudly replied. "I tend the vegetable gardens and fill the reservoir there." He pointed up across the valley. I couldn't see the reservoir, but I nodded like I was impressed anyway. We soon found ourselves among the trees on a heavily traveled path, and I felt like we were being watched not by the creatures in the woods but by powerful magic. Whoever was doing it was not being subtle and wanted us to know. Even Menashe suddenly seemed worried, as she began searching the towering canopy and looking deep into the woods. My obfuscation sphere burned where it touched my chest as it feebly tried to ward off the powerful intrusive mage's sight. The heat forced me to send the sphere to my dimensional space, and the oppressive feelings slowly faded. Whoever had been watching us wanted us to know that we couldn't hide, even with an artifact. It made me doubt that they had been aware of us when we started our climb, as the sphere had not reacted at the time. Also, we had not been met at the edge of the caldera, and Menashe had to announce us with her lightning. The Titans were not all-seeing and all-powerful. The aurochs appeared to wander the valley freely. Large cow pies were often visible along the path, and the grazing animals could be seen through the trees. We passed another stone giant, much larger than Lampter, who seemed to be milking one in a clearing. The giant looked at us curiously before returning to her task of squeezing the udder's teats to fill a stone bucket. Her thick fingers worked methodically, coaxing heavy streams of milk from the massive udder. Each jet landed with a wet whoosh, rhythmic and loud, like someone drumming. Lampter led us to a large grassy clearing with a white marble building on the far side. Large Greek pillars circled the structure reminiscent of the temple of Athena Nike. We started across the grassy expanse, and I noticed the flowers among the grass were familiar to me and shouldn't be growing at this altitude. Many of them were used in alchemy, but a number of them were also rare. Our guide trampled a patch of blue velvet flowers. They were one of the necessary ingredients for invisibility potions, but needed to be harvested under Neptune's tear when the petals became translucent. I couldn't even fathom the riches we were casually crushing. My wandering thoughts ended when we reached the structure. It was much larger up close and looked like an open-air pavilion. I hesitated to enter as our guide walked away, leaving without announcing us. Before stepping in, I noted the best escape routes and the general direction we had come from. The shortest way into the trees was to our left, and that is where I planned to go. Menashe waited for me, probably not wanting to enter alone. although she wore confidence on her face. Passing between the majestic ribbed pillars made me feel small. I entered a large open-air auditorium with Menashe. 3 epic thrones were at the far end. A giant of monumental proportions occupied each. The central throne dwarfed the other 2 and had a flared backrest, but that chair's storm giant looked younger than the other 2. My instincts told me it was Chrusos, or more likely Kronos, of myth and legend. I shouldn't have been surprised. I had a spell form to slow my aging. He could probably do the same if he was the fabled god of time. My eyes had passed over the other 2 candidates who were before the assembled giants. Fioasha was on his knees, isolated and alone to the left. It took me a moment to figure out that he was not paying respect but was injured, as his leg was bandaged and at an odd angle. His first was not at his side, or anywhere in sight. Cleric Durakasha and Warlord Rook stood to the right, both healthy and watching us. Their faces didn't reveal what we were walking into. Something about the scene didn't feel right. Menashe whispered, concerned. "Where is Warlord Etius?" I didn't reply, but I thought he was probably dead judging by Fioasha's condition. Fioasha's eyes revealed his immense pain from his injuries. As we slowly walked forward, the giants' 3 sets of eyes watched us approach. The 2 giants flanking the central throne appeared to be aged females in pearl-white togas. The central figure, whose eyes were focused on us, wore a black smock secured to his waist by a thick leather belt. He reclined on his throne, his face impassive, but his eyes judging. Just what were we walking into? As we moved to stand between the other candidates, I could feel the energy of the assembled trio of storm giants. If gods had auras, then I was being pressured by it. I felt awe and hopelessness battling inside my head. Another orc pest brought a human pet with her. The giant's deep voice echoed in the chamber. The other orcs now had their eyes fixed forward, acknowledging the storm giant and offering us no help. "Offer your case so I may decide your fate," Chrusos said with finality. Menashe gave me an apologetic look. This was not the reception we had been expecting. Chrusos appeared to be annoyed, and I guessed it was because of Fioasha. Menashe gathered herself. "Lord Chrusos, Lord," he bellowed a laugh. "Do not presume to call me a lord, king, emperor, or any other title you insignificant beings used to describe your leaders. I am Chrusos." His name was a title unto itself. "I apologize," Menashe said, bowing low. "Chrusos, we have come to seek your generosity." "We with grinding anger," Chrusos interrupted Menashe. "What makes you think I am generous?" His voice grew to a roar. "Your people revolted against our magnanimous rule." He stood from his throne, rising to over 25 feet in height. Veins bulged on his arms and his jaw was tight. He was not in a great mood, and navigating this audience was feeling more and more perilous. The aged storm giant woman to his right spoke for the first time. Her tone was tempered by her commanding voice. "Chrusos, sit!" The ancient storm giant turned on the aged woman. Their eyes met in silent communication. His anger slowly faded, and he resumed his seat. His temper cooling, he gestured. "What? Have you brought me in tribute?" "These fools brought nothing of interest. I hope you don't disappoint me as well," he added with a note of warning. I knew Menashe had nothing to satisfy the storm giants. I wasn't sure what to offer from my space. We looked at each other and she looked apologetic for getting me into this. I sighed, stepping forward. "We have brought you a cauldron of appleberry jam," I said. My thoughts switched to my escape plan. Could I call forth the black spear and pierce his eye when he came forward to collect the cauldron? The 2 elderly giants flanking him made killing Chrusos risky. The cauldron appeared on the floor between me and Chrusos. His large eyebrow arched in surprise, and I could hear Rook and Jorakasha shuffling movements behind me to my right. The cauldron was only half full of jam. Maveth had made it in the shimmering labyrinth, and it had been 3/4 full then. I had used it slowly, but since I didn't need to eat much with the ring of sustenance, a significant amount remained. Chrusos leaned forward in his seat, his massive nostrils sniffing the air. Instead of coming to the cauldron came to him. A spell form flashed in front of his hands, and the cauldron sped toward his outstretched hand. His smallest finger was almost as big as the cauldron opening as he stuffed it inside. His finger was covered in jam, and he sucked on it. His face lit up in surprise, clearly enjoying the sweet treat. He took 3 more dips of jam before he handed the cauldron to the giantess to his left. Chrysos appeared much less agitated. His voice echoed as he said, "You have earned my favor to leave." He waved his hand dismissively, signaling only to Menashe and me. The other candidates still awaited their fates. Although Fiasha had the advantage of growing up in the spire's shadow, he had somehow angered the Titans. We had also not achieved our goal of acquiring an artifact from the spire. Meeting Menashe's eyes, I knew she would not leave without an artifact. "Do you like bear meat?" I asked the ancient storm giant. In a mocking tone, Chrysos addressed me. "Would you hunt a bear to prove your prowess to me, human? I gave you leave to keep your lives, yet you persist in annoying me." This wasn't going well. My artifacts would only be dollhouse toys for the storm giant. I poured all the remaining bear meat onto the floor in front of me. The floor was glossy marble. So maybe it wasn't that unsanitary. Hundreds of pounds of bear meat appeared, blood soon spreading from the large pile. "I already hunted a few bears," I began to say with a smirk. But I immediately realized that I had misstepped. Chrysos' eyes flicked between me and the pile of meat. The appearance of the cauldron hadn't surprised him, but clearly, the volume of meat did. The old storm giant on his left spoke to Chrysos with a lisp. He was not born on Dizia. A sudden weight pressed down on me as if someone had just increased gravity tenfold. I was not the only one. I heard Fiasha cry out in pain, and Menashe went hard to her knees, using her hands to brace herself. Chrysos was too far away for me to use my dimensional space on him, not that I thought I could overcome his defenses. I remained standing, as did Rook and Joarkasha. My leg muscles trembled as I resisted, and I had no chance of running. The old female stood and walked to me. She bent over to study me like I was a curiosity. Her pale gray eyes looked past me. She spoke for the other giants, not me. "He is a recent arrival. The ether engines are still functioning and bringing others here." "I do not care," Chrysos yelled in restrained rage. I acknowledged my defeat and the folly of Hephaestus. The child races can have the planet and the universe for all I care. They ignored me as I strained to remain standing. "This one is also a recent arrival." The storm giantess' gaze had fallen with a lecherous hunger on Menashe, who was sweating and trying not to be flattened to the floor. "Ephemeris, no?" Chrysos said, addressing the storm giantess. "They have not violated the guest's sanctity." His piercing gaze made her sit back down, but it was obvious she wanted us. I suspected her intention was to invite us to dinner as the main course. The third storm giant tapped her wrinkled hand on the arm of her marble seat. "I am curious what else the human has, guest or not." Suddenly, the giant's language changed from Orshish to what I assumed was the language of the Titans. Their rapid speech showed only tiny hints of Latin as they discussed our fate. I assumed that they were discussing whether to turn us into essences, but that was probably just my pessimism. We were all held helpless by the intense gravity. Chrysos yelled a few minutes later, and Lampter arrived shortly afterward. I believed Chrysos didn't want to waste my gift, as the juvenile stone giant quickly gathered the meat onto an rock hide. Although the stone giant was within range of my dimensional space, killing him would not help us escape from this. When he left, Chrysos turned his gaze on me. His lips curled into a smile. "Now, human, let's see what else you are carrying hidden from my eyes."